Chapter 59. On the second day after entering the city, Colin received an invitation. Suzerain's meeting? Colin read through the contents of the invitation and immediately realized that the suzerains gathered in Icestone City were preparing to cause trouble. Caitlin didn't seem to realize the hidden meaning behind the invitation. She was only happy for her brother. In her opinion, even though her brother hadn't officially received the title of Baron from the Duke, he had already received the recognition of all the suzerains in the northern frontier. "You need a Baron's ceremonial robe," Caitlin suddenly said seriously. Then she ran out in a hurry. "I'll go make one for you right now." "Hey, wait, don't I have to go with you?" Caitlin turned around and smiled dotingly. "Silly brother. Do you think I don't know your size?" Colin was stunned. Looking at his sister's back as she left, the memories of the past couldn't help but surface in his mind. Those beautiful memories kept reminding Colin how close the relationship between him and his brother was. Would the sister in his memory really plot against him for the title of Baron? Colin suddenly felt uncertain. Moreover, if it really was her, would she still be able to face him so calmly and naturally? Colin didn't believe that his sister was such a scheming person. At least, the sister in his memory wasn't. Perhaps the assassination had been planned by Count Aldman in secret from the start, and he only wanted to give his illegitimate son a family property. His sister, on the other hand, was probably kept in the dark. But this was only a possibility. Colin sighed and stopped himself from making wild guesses. Even though he didn't want the sister who had cared for him, since he was young, to become an enemy, he couldn't completely trust Caitlin before the truth came to light. 2 days passed in a flash, and it was time for the suzerain's meeting. Colin left the inn under his sister's nagging and came to the Su Duo family's castle. He saw the butler who tried to throw him out last time. This time he welcomed Colin with a smile. However, Colin did not feel much sincerity from this smile. Entering the conference hall, Colin was led to an inconspicuous corner by an attendant. It couldn't be helped. Since this was a suzerain's conference, the participants were all real nobles with titles. As for Colin, who hadn't really inherited the title of Baron, he could only sit in the corner. If it wasn't for the fact that he represented the Angeli family, he wouldn't have been able to enter the venue as a knight. The lords entered the venue one after another, and like Colin, they were led to their respective seats by the attendants. The meeting this time was very formal, so everyone's seats were arranged according to their status. No one was allowed to sit randomly. The atmosphere in the venue was also very solemn. Basically, no one spoke. When it was almost time for the meeting to start, the venue was almost full. There was only one empty seat left in the front row. Just as Colin was guessing who the last seat was reserved for, an old acquaintance appeared at the door. Earl Dawson, the dwarven count, was led to the last seat by his attendant. Everyone was present. Sitting in the front row were 4 counts. Aside from Earl Dawson, who was loyal to Marquis Garcia, the other 3 were all vassals of the Duke of St. Hilda. They were the people with the highest status in this conference. However, neither of the 2 marquises of Icestone City were present. Earl Dawson could represent Marquis Garcia, but what about Marquis Charles? Colin seemed to have guessed the purpose of this conference. Ahem. Earl Oman cleared his throat and announced, "All right, since everyone is here, let's begin." After speaking, he looked around. Seeing that the other 3 counts nodded in agreement, Earl Oman picked up a piece of parchment and said, "This conference is mainly to discuss the matter of Marquis Charles." Colin thought to himself, as expected. Even though the Black Cavalry had annihilated the invading troll army and taken revenge, it was clear that the lords of the northern frontier were not prepared to let Marquis Charles go. In other words, these lords were still unwilling to let the Duke of St. Hilda go. They needed an explanation. 200,000 northern frontier soldiers died on the battlefield, and a dozen cities were plundered. Someone has to take responsibility for such a disastrous defeat. After Earl Oman finished criticizing Marquis Charles's crimes, he pointed at the parchment in his hand and said, "Thus, in accordance with the will of Marquis Garcia, I have drafted this petition, requesting His Excellency the Duke of St. Hilda to immediately strip Marquis Charles of his title. Lords who agree with this decision, please sign it." After saying that, Earl Amon was the first to sign his name and handed it over to Earl Dawson. Earl Dawson smiled and signed without hesitation. Colin noticed that after seeing Earl Dawson sign his name, many lords secretly heaved a sigh of relief, their gazes becoming resolute. Evidently, the addition of the Black Cavalry had greatly increased their courage. As long as Marquis Garcia was on their side, then changing the master of the northern frontier was not impossible. The third Earl also signed his name, and the parchment was passed to the fourth Earl. This white-haired old Earl slowly brought the parchment to his eyes and looked at it for a long time. It was as if he was carefully considering every word. At the start, everyone was very understanding. After all, he was an old man, and it was understandable that his eyesight was not good. But after 10 minutes, this old Earl still had not finished reading it. Everyone was obviously impatient, and many people began to whisper to each other. "Count Morrison, are you done?" Count Ullman couldn't help but ask. Oh, wait a moment," Count Morrison replied casually as he continued to read the book. After another 10 minutes, he finally put down the parchment. "Are you done reading?" "I'm done. Do you have any objections?" "Yes." The atmosphere in the hall immediately became heavy. "Please speak." Earl Amon's expression sank slightly, but he still maintained his poise. Count Morrison chuckled and asked, "Do you know what I see in this petition?" "What did you see?" "I only saw 2 words. Count Morrison's gaze suddenly sharpened. He no longer looked as frail as he did before. "Betrayal." The old but loud voice echoed in the hall. This caused the expressions on everyone's faces to become somewhat unnatural, especially the other 3 earls who had just signed their names. After a long while, Earl Amon said calmly, "Since Earl Morrison does not agree with our decision, you can choose not to sign it." Earl Morrison snorted lightly and threw the parchment into the hands of an attendant at the side, saying disdainfully, "Can I leave now? The aura here makes me sick." "Of course you can leave." Earl Amon gave him a look. "Knight of Khan, send Earl Morrison away. I can walk on my own." Count Morrison ignored Khan, who was trying to help him, and walked straight out. TCH. However, before Count Morrison could reach the door, a sharp sword pierced through his back. "Ah!" Earl Morrison screamed as he turned around, angrily rebuking, "Coward! Didn't your father tell you to sneak attack a knight from behind?" TCH. Knight of Khan stabbed him again. This time he stabbed him from the front. Pfft! Earl Morrison spat a mouthful of blood on Khan's face and cursed. "Everyone in the Su Duo family will die a horrible death." Chapter 60. Bang! As Count Morrison's body fell to the ground, everyone in the venue seemed to have reacted. Cries of shock sounded everywhere. Murder! Moreover, the one he killed was a count. The Knight of Khan, whose face was covered in blood, had a calm expression. It was as if he had just killed a chicken. Completely ignoring the strange gazes around him, the Knight of Khan calmly sheathed his long sword and returned to his seat. Colin looked at him, feeling as if he had become a completely different person. The coward who hid in Fallen Eagle City, and did not even dare to enter the battlefield, had now become a ruthless thug, who killed without batting an eye. However, Colin was not surprised. Cowardice and brutality, 2 seemingly unrelated extreme personalities, were actually twins. A normally cowardly person, once forced into a desperate situation, would erupt with brutality that would often make people gasp in amazement. Moreover, Colin had already realized it. In fact, Knight Khan had already run out of options. When Khan was the first to stand up and angrily rebuke Marquis Charles, asking him to give up his title to atone for the deaths of his soldiers, he could not turn back. The Su Duo family could only walk this path to the end. If he could not make the Duke bow his head this time, or even change to another Duke, then perhaps Count Oman could still protect himself. But the Su Duo family would definitely become the target of the Duke's anger. Thinking of this, Colin could not help but sympathize with this pitiful fellow. After all, he was just a small pawn that the old fox Count Oman had pushed to the front to test him. But now he had really become a small pawn that could only advance, not retreat. The thick smell of blood filled the entire venue, causing everyone to feel uneasy. "Continue," Count Oman ordered the attendant holding the parchment. "Yes." The attendant immediately passed the parchment to the next lord. Count Morrison's corpse was left lying on the ground, unattended by anyone. Fresh blood slowly flowed, and the scene became even more solemn. After seeing the consequences of not signing, the lords behind naturally did not dare to object, and all signed their names. Soon, the attendant arrived in front of Colin. Colin looked at the paper and pen in front of him and sighed in his heart. He could only obediently sign his name. There was no other way. If he didn't sign it, he wouldn't be able to walk out of here alive. Khan probably couldn't wait to kill him. Finally, the signing was completed. Apart from Count Morrison, who had already turned into a corpse, all the nobles present signed their names on the parchment. At this time, they were all in the same boat. As for whether this ship would sail to the Sea of Stars, or sink halfway to the bottom of the sea, that would depend on the arrangement of fate. Very good. Count Almond stood up and received the signed parchment. Next, I will arrange for someone to deliver this petition to the Duke of St. Hilda. Today's meeting ends here. Thank you, everyone. After that, he strode out of the venue. Everyone left one after another. Colin was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, he stepped forward and stopped Count Dawson. Before he could speak, Count Dawson used his eyes to stop Colin, and then motioned for him to follow him. Colin obediently shut up, and followed Count Dawson through a long corridor. They arrived in front of a room deep in the castle. Looking at the familiar layout, Colin felt as if he had been here before. Where is this? Hey Colin, why are you here? Before Count Dawson could answer his question, Colin heard Vera's voice. As soon as he turned his head, Colin saw the female mage who was dressed particularly valiantly. She was wearing a kite plate chiffon shirt and white tight-fitting breeches. On her feet, she wore a pair of brown high-riding boots. This outfit was very tight, and it perfectly outlined Vera's beautiful figure. LSP Colin stared at her several times. Count Dawson brought me here. Are you going out dressed like this? Yes. Uncle wants to take me hunting, Vera said excitedly. Uncle? Colin realized why he felt that the layout of this place was very familiar. This was because this was the residence of Marquis Garcia. 2 months ago, Vera had brought him here. At that time, the two of them were preparing to dissuade Marquis Garcia from having a conflict with the Duke of St. Hilda. Moreover, at that time Marquis Garcia was not in the castle, but he was preparing to hunt. However, at that time his prey was not an ordinary beast. It was an army of 300,000 trolls. Now the conflict between the two brothers was imminent, and Marquis Garcia was going to hunt again? This time what was his prey? Colin, you came at the right time. Marquis Garcia also came out and invited him with a smile. Let's go hunting together. Colin blinked and said with a smile, okay. At the same time, a messenger was riding a fast horse out of Icestone City, heading towards the Golden Lion Army's encampment. Eastern District of Icestone City, Tulip Chamber of Commerce's encampment. Earl Amon was led by Oliver to a secret room. He's inside? Yes, Earl. Earl Amon waved his hand, indicating for Oliver to leave. Oliver's chubby face was filled with a flattering smile that was about to overflow. Yes, my lord. If you need anything else, please let me know. After speaking, he quickly left. Earl Amon opened the door alone and walked in. He closed the door. The room was empty. Earl Amon did not find it strange, but sat down on a chair and waited. After an unknown period of time, a figure suddenly appeared in the room, as if he had been there from the beginning. Earl Amon looked at the black-robed man who appeared like a ghost, and was not surprised. He just nodded and asked, "Why are you in such a hurry to see me? I have a message from Mr. Count Amon frowned, then said calmly, "Speak." Mr. Wong hopes that you can abort the original plan. Haha. Count Amon laughed. He stood up and walked in front of the black-robed man. He looked down at the other party and said coldly, "Then help me send a message to Mr. Feng. I'm not his servant, so I don't need to listen to his orders." "Your Excellency, you can't do this. That would spoil Mr. Chang's plan." Count Amon grabbed the black-robed man by the neck, cutting him off. Huff. Huff. The black-robed man struggled to catch his breath. As he struggled, the hood on his head slipped down, revealing a panic-stricken face. "Remember, you're just a messenger. You only have one mouth and one pair of ears. Go back and relay whatever you hear. Everything else has nothing to do with you. Understood? I understand. Boom. Count Oman threw the black-robed man to the ground, then turned and prepared to leave. Lord Count, there is one more thing. The black-robed man suddenly spoke again. Speak. His Highness Okamoto has already inherited the position of Prince of the South, and will be on a diplomatic mission to the northern frontier. Count Oman suddenly turned and stared at the black-robed man with bright eyes. There was an undisguised killing intent in his eyes. The black-robed man was so frightened by the other party's gaze that he took a step back, his expression wary. But Count Oman did not do anything rash. He just stared coldly at the black-robed man for a while, then said calmly, Understood. And then he left. Chapter 61. Whoosh! Whoosh! 2 arrows were shot out. One of the arrows hit the hare that was trying to escape, and the arrow missed. Da-da-da. The 2 men quickly caught up with the hare, and one of them shouted excitedly when he saw the arrow mark on the hare's leg. Ha, Colin, I shot it again this time. The other man shook his head in annoyance and said, Miss Vera's archery skills are really getting better and better. Vera raised her head proudly, and then motioned the cavalry behind her to come forward and take her prey. Oh, it is still alive. The hare that was shot in the thigh by the arrow was still struggling in the hands of the servant at the moment, and it seemed as though it did not want to accept its fate. Colin was about to go over and give this stubborn little fellow a quick death, so that Vera would not be so kind as to kill it. Da-da-da. There was another sound of horse hooves and Marquis Garcia came over with a team of cavalry. Vera exclaimed in surprise when she saw the other party's expression. Wow, Uncle, you have a big harvest. Marquis Garcia smiled indifferently and glanced at Colin. Of course, after all, no one on our side went easy on you. Colin did not seem to hear the ridicule in Marquis Garcia's words, and he smiled. It seems that we can have a good meal tonight. That's great. Vera cheered and excitedly went to check on Marquis Garcia's prey. Halfway through, she suddenly thought of something, and she turned around and said to the servant, Let's set the hare free. Anyway, it is too small, and it does not have much meat. Yes. The servant helplessly carried the hare that was still struggling. At the same time, he could not help but curse in his heart. One deliberately went easy on them to please them, and the other was too kind to kill them. Fortunately, Marquis Garcia was around. Otherwise, they would have to go hungry tonight. As night fell, the servants lit a campfire and began to prepare food. Vera looked at Colin as he took out a lump of black mud from the fire. She frowned and asked, Is this really edible? Of course, Colin said confidently as he peeled off the outer layer of charred soil and skin. This is the beggar's chicken. Oh no, I used a deer leg, so it's the beggar's chicken. There was once a chef named Huang Rong who used this dish to conquer a Saint Realm expert. Huang Rong? What a strange name. Vera asked curiously as she rested her chin on her hands. What is the name of the sanctuary powerhouse? I forgot. Colin couldn't continue lying. The saint-level combatants in this world were all famous. If he continued to lie, he would be easily exposed. All right, let's not dwell on the details. Come and taste my flour, dear. Colin cut a piece of deer leg and handed it over to Vera. Vera carefully took a bite. Then, she had a strange expression on her face. Is it not delicious? Colin saw this and put a piece into his mouth with a guilty conscience. Then he immediately spat it out. Bah! It's not cooked. Vera looked at Colin's embarrassed expression and suddenly laughed. Just as Colin was thinking about what he had done wrong, the crisp sound of horse hooves suddenly came from outside the camp. A cavalryman quickly approached and handed a letter to Marquis Garcia. When Colin saw this, he immediately realized that it should be news from Ice Stone City. So he also went over. Marquis Garcia did not avoid him and directly handed the letter to him after reading it. Colin took it and hurriedly glanced through it. What's wrong? Vera was also a little curious and turned around to ask. Before Colin could speak, Marquis Garcia said first. Nothing. Earl Dawson wrote a letter to report the distribution of the Black Cavalry's spoils of war. Oh. Vera was obviously not interested in this, and turned around to focus on saving the deer leg that Colin had destroyed. Colin did not say anything, and silently threw the letter into the fire to destroy the evidence. Marquis Garcia lied. The content of the letter was not about the distribution of the spoils of war at all. Instead, it was about the feudal lord's petition. This petition to strip Marquis Charles of his title had already been sent to the Duke of St. Hilda. However, the Duke of St. Hilda directly rejected the feudal lord's request and ordered all the feudal lords to immediately go to the Golden Lion Army's encampment to pay him a visit. Colin did not think that the Duke of St. Hilda's attitude would be so unyielding. He did not have any intention of backing down at all. This was simply forcing the feudal lords to rebel. Colin glanced at Marquis Garcia again, but he could not see any emotions on his face. "Sir Marquis, are we preparing to return to Icestone City?" Colin asked tentatively. They had already been out for 3 days. Moreover, this hunting trip seemed to be really about hunting. But now, the situation in Icestone City had reached a point where it could be triggered at any moment. It was time to return. "No need, Earl Dawson will take care of everything." Marquis Garcia calmly rejected. Colin was immediately confused. Was this Marquis planning to stay out of this? "You too, come and try my roasted deer leg." Vera seemed to be completely unaware of what was happening in Icestone City at this time, and was still smiling without a care in the world. "Okay." The two men immediately revealed smiles, and went to enjoy the delicacies personally cooked by the beautiful girl. It was as if the matters in Icestone City really had nothing to do with them. The night was getting darker, and most of the people had already gone to bed. Colin could not sleep, so he got up and slipped into the forest far away from the camp, and caught the owl that had been crying non-stop. Crack! After breaking the owl's neck, Colin used his dagger to cut its main artery, and then put his mouth on it. Gulp gulp. After drinking his fill, Colin wiped his mouth and buried the owl's body before returning to the camp. Just as he was about to enter his tent, Colin saw Marquis Garcia also walk out. "Sir Marquis, you can't sleep either?" "Yes." The Marquis nodded at Colin. "Let's walk together?" "Okay." Colin hurriedly followed him. The two walked out of the camp. The surrounding guards also quietly followed, but they were all scattered far away. "Are you worried about your sister in Icestone City?" Marquis Garcia was the first to speak. Actually not." Colin was speaking the truth. However, Marquis Garcia clearly did not believe him and comforted him. "Don't worry. Count Dawson will take good care of her. The same goes for the army, the Angeli family left behind in the city." "Thank you, Sir Marquis." "You're welcome. After all, I was the one who pulled you out, so I should be responsible." "Sir Marquis, actually, I am very grateful that you brought me out." "Why?" "Because I also did not want to be involved in that fatal whirlpool in Icestone City." Marquis Garcia glanced at Colin and smiled. "You are a smart person. Then, if you were in Icestone City right now, which side would you be on?" Colin's heart instantly tightened. Marquis Garcia's straightforward question put him in a bit of a difficult position. He did not know whether this was a test or not. As his mind whirled, Colin played a little trick. "Sir Marquis, the Angeli family will always be loyal to the House of St. Hilda." Chapter 62. It was a very clever answer. It was basically the same as not answering at all. Being loyal to the House of St. Hilda didn't mean that he was loyal to the current Duke of St. Hilda. Marquis Garcia was also a member of the House of St. Hilda. In Colin's opinion, no matter what happened in Icestone City in the end, the master of the northern frontier would still only be born from the House of St. Hilda. And the most important person was actually Marquis Garcia, because the Black Cavalry's terrifying army had the power to make the final decision. No matter if it chose to help the Golden Lion Legion or the allied suzerains, it would leave the other side with no room for resistance. Now it was up to Marquis Garcia to continue being loyal to his brother, or to sit on the throne of the northern frontier. From all the previous signs, Marquis Garcia seemed to be leaning towards the latter. After all, he first accepted the invitation of the suzerains of the northern frontier and entered Icestone City. He even sent Count Dawson to attend the suzerains' meeting and sign the petition. This clearly showed that Marquis Garcia supported the suzerains group. However, Colin didn't dare to be certain, because 2 months ago, When everyone thought that Marquis Garcia was going to fight with his brother, he led the Black Cavalry on a 1,000-mile raid and directly destroyed the Trolls' army of 300,000. Who knew if the two brothers were putting on an act again this time? Crafty. Marquis Garcia laughed lightly, clearly not satisfied with Colin's clever answer. Thus he changed the way he asked. If you were me, which side would you stand on? Colin felt a headache coming on. He felt that Marquis Garcia was really hard to please tonight. Why did he keep asking these kinds of life-threatening questions? Also this time, he didn't seem to be able to pull any tricks. After struggling for a long time, Colin could only choose the most honest answer. If I were you, I would choose to be loyal to my oath. Marquis Garcia's footsteps paused, and he looked seriously at Colin, as if he wanted to confirm whether the other party was sincere or not. The so-called oath was naturally Marquis Garcia's oath to be loyal to the Duke of St. Hilda. Thus, Colin's answer basically chose to stand on the Duke's side. Oh, is that so? Marquis Garcia continued to ask. Oath? I've seen too many betrayals, and I don't believe in oaths anymore. Colin, you have to give me a better reason. Colin was very regretful now. Why did he have to come out for supper for no reason? He must be a fool now. Moreover, he felt that Marquis Garcia was very abnormal tonight. Why did he keep asking him such questions? Unless Marquis Garcia himself hadn't made up his mind, which was why he kept interrogating Colin. In fact, if Colin really stood in Marquis Garcia's position, he would definitely choose to betray his brother. He wouldn't put up with the Duke's bullshit, endure the endless suspicion, and face the constant suppression. If he could control the Black Cavalry, then he definitely wouldn't give up the position of Lord of the Northern Frontier to others. But he didn't dare to say this out loud. From the looks of it, Marquis Garcia seemed to be thinking the same thing. But Colin's intuition told him that if he really said this, then he would definitely lose the favor of Marquis Garcia. Colin suddenly realized that perhaps this was the Marquis' ultimate test for him. There is no better reason, Lord Marquis. Colin decided to take a gamble. In his opinion, among all the superiors, no one would want their subordinate to be someone who didn't keep his oath. Betrayal was always the most taboo, and the most vigilant thing for the superiors. Therefore, Colin stopped and continued righteously. No matter what kind of burden I have to bear, no matter what kind of fate I have to bear, I will never go back on my oath. This is my basic integrity as a knight, and also the greatest honor of the Angeli family. Marquis Garcia also stopped and looked at Colin with bright eyes. Colin also returned a calm gaze without fear. The moonlight shone coldly in the forest, the wind blew gently, and the leaves rustled. After a long time, Marquis Garcia finally withdrew his scrutinizing gaze and continued to walk forward. Colin blinked his sore eyes and hurriedly followed. Did he pass the test? He was somewhat doubtful. Marquis Garcia didn't say anything and just kept walking forward. After walking for an unknown amount of time, the two gradually went deep into the forest. Just as Colin was thinking about whether to suggest going back to sleep, Marquis Garcia suddenly spoke again. The Black Cavalry will stand on the Duke's side, and those reckless lords will pay the price for their betrayal. As expected, Colin's heart trembled. He made the right bet. It was another trap this time. Those lords who tried to cause trouble were fooled by these two brothers again. That's right. All traitors deserve to die. Colin immediately agreed. At the same time, he secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, he didn't follow those people to cause trouble, or else he would have died without a burial ground. Then he started to gloat again, because Earl Amon was among those lords who caused trouble, and it looked like he was the leader of the organizers. Hee. Who asked you to send someone to assassinate me? Who asked you to covet my family's title? Let's see how you die this time. Just as Colin was secretly pleased, Marquis Garcia spoke again. However, I made this choice not only because of the oath I made back then. Then why? Colin's curiosity was piqued. Marquis Garcia stopped again and looked up at the crescent moon in the sky. He said in a low voice, "Actually, this was a plan that was made long ago. It has been implemented since 3 years ago." 3 years ago? Colin immediately thought of the major event that happened 3 years ago. Marquis Garcia was transferred back from the front lines, and the black cavalry was put into hiding. Could it be? That's right. Marquis Garcia seemed to have guessed what Colin was thinking. When I retired from the front lines, it was actually part of the plan. Colin's mouth was wide open. This secret left him dumbfounded. Furthermore, he had finally pieced everything together. At this moment, he finally figured out the things that he didn't understand before. He suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Because such a huge plan, or perhaps a conspiracy, was actually at the cost of 200,000 Northern Frontier soldiers. And its target was the trolls, as well as the feudal lords of the Northern Frontier. Colin could understand dealing with the trolls. However, dealing with the feudal lords who were loyal to him, Colin couldn't quite understand. Unless the House of St. Hilda was unwilling to share the Northern Frontier with the feudal lords. That Duke wanted to take back his power. I didn't expect the Duke of St. Hilda to be such a far-sighted person. Colin hesitated for a moment, but still used a compliment. But in fact, he only felt a deep fear towards this Duke whom he had never met before. This plan wasn't made by the Duke. Marquis Garcia denied Colin's guess. Then who was it? Colin asked curiously. He felt that it shouldn't have been made by Marquis Garcia. From their previous interactions, Colin knew that this Marquis wasn't a person who liked to scheme. Marquis Garcia softly said a name that Colin would never have thought of. Earl Oman. What? Colin was once again dumbfounded. The schadenfreude hidden in the bottom of his heart immediately disappeared without a trace. Instead, it was replaced by a deeper fear. Chapter 63. Winter 3 years ago. It was a snowy night. Marquis Garcia hurried back to Winter Castle. Along the way to Lion's Roar Castle, the Marquis didn't even change his clothes and went straight to the Duke's study. Knock knock. Come in. Marquis Garcia pushed open the door and entered. There was only the Duke of St. Hilda in the study. It must have been hard on you. Have a seat and have a cup of ale to warm yourself up. Marquis Garcia took the cup of ale handed by his brother and drank it in one gulp. The wind and frost of the journey were completely expelled from his body. Why did you call me back in such a hurry? What's the situation at the front line? It's the same as before. Gombik is scared of me and is hiding in the castle, not daring to come out for field battles. Hee, that old tortoise. Marquis Garcia poured himself another cup of ale and sipped it while waiting for his brother to continue. He was clear that the Duke didn't call him back in such a hurry, just to ask him a few questions. Someone suggested to me a plan that can help you lure Gombik out of the turtle shell. Oh, tell me about it. Marquis Garcia was immediately interested. First, you have to withdraw from the front line. I'm afraid that's not enough. Yes, your black cavalry should also withdraw. Then who will be responsible for the defense of the front line? Charles. Hearing this, Marquis Garcia suddenly frowned. He hesitated for a long time and said in a deliberative tone, Charles, I'm afraid he still lacks experience. Hee, if I don't send a brat to the front line, how can I lure Gombik out of his shell? But war isn't a child's play. If you do this, it's very likely that you'll overreach yourself and bring about a crushing defeat to the Northern Frontier. There's always a price to pay for success. The Duke of St. Hilda's eyes were unusually firm. This time, I'm prepared to bury an army. What? Marquis Garcia was inexplicably horrified, almost thinking that his brother had gone crazy. But the Duke of St. Hilda's serious expression didn't seem to be joking at all. Let me ask you, if black cavalry were to encounter Gombik's troll army in the wild without any preparation, how confident are you in winning? If Cambuc is not prepared, and if there are no castles nearby that we can hide in, then I have full confidence. Marquis Garcia's tone revealed a strong confidence. Good. Then let's finish it in one fell swoop. The Duke of St. Hilda slapped the table hard and declared resolutely, I've had enough of those haunting trolls. I'm going to completely cut off their claws that extend into the Northern Frontier. So, you come down and take Charles's place. Let him lose this round, and let Gombik have a good taste of victory. After the trolls have wantonly plundered the Northern Frontier, they will naturally return to the troll capital with their wealth and glory. At that time, you can lead the black cavalry to chase after them and catch them off guard. Marquis Garcia was still frowning. Even if you're willing to bury an army, and let the trolls loot the northern cities, how can you guarantee that the trolls will be unprepared when they retreat? This requires us to put on a show. How? If I transfer you away from the front lines, in the eyes of others, they will definitely think that I'm starting to fear you. So you can also show some dissatisfaction with me at the right time. In addition, the army that Charles will bury will have a large number of private armies. This will definitely arouse the dissatisfaction of the various families in the northern frontier. When the time comes, someone will instigate it, and it will easily create a situation where you try to gather the dissatisfied lords to fight against me. At this time, the trolls will definitely think that we can't take care of ourselves and won't be on guard. Have you forgotten an important problem? Marquis Garcia suddenly interrupted. What problem? Will I really be dissatisfied with you? Marquis Garcia's eyes flickered. If Charles really loses at the front lines and buries an army in the northern frontier, at that time, won't my black cavalry be even more unstoppable? When Talos Oman suggested this plan to me, I also considered the possibility that you might pull it off. Sandhild suddenly smiled. When Talos Oman suggested this plan to me, I also considered the possibility of you pulling it off. This is Count Oman's plan? Alright then, what do you think? Will I turn the act into reality? The Duke of St. Hilda did not directly answer this question. Instead, he continued. At that time, I was thinking that if Talos did not think that you might turn the act into reality, it would be fine. But if he thought of it, but deliberately left it out, then, either he is extremely confident in our relationship and feels that we won't turn against each other, or he is harboring evil intentions and pretending to deal with the trolls. But in reality, he wants to cause internal strife in the northern frontier. Marquis Garcia was stunned for a moment, then lowered his head to look at the wine cup in his hand, as if pondering Count Oman's true intentions. But the Duke of St. Hilda did not give his brother more time to think, and directly said his thoughts. No matter what Talos Oman's true intentions are, I know that you will not betray me. You are that confident. Marquis Garcia's expression was cold. When I have the power to influence the situation on the northern frontier, how can you be sure that I will not be tempted? Of course you will be tempted, but betrayal only means that the price of loyalty is not enough. So, I will increase the price of your loyalty. Increase what price? After Charles is defeated, he will be stripped of his Marquis title. That's it. Of course not. The Duke of St. Hilda smiled and continued. Vera will inherit the title of Marquis. Marquis Garcia's eyes narrowed. He was finally moved, but immediately, he felt deeply puzzled. In order to eliminate the threat of the trolls, you are willing to pay such a huge price? No. The trolls are not the only threat. The Duke of St. Hilda shook his head with a serious expression. Who else? Do you know where the biggest threat on the northern frontier comes from? Is it not the trolls? The Duke of St. Hilda shook his head again and said in a deep voice. External threats will only make us stronger and more united, but they will not destroy us. Only internal threats can really corrode the foundation of the House of St. Hilda's rule. Marquis Garcia was stunned for a moment before he realized what his brother was talking about. You mean the lords of the northern frontier? Yes. The Duke of St. Hilda gritted his teeth and said, Do you know how many territories the House of St. Hilda has under its name? Do you know how many years the family has been unable to make ends meet? Do you know why I have been unwilling to ban the trade with the trolls? Do you think I don't know that this trade is actually helping the enemy? But what can I do? The family needs these profits. It may seem that the entire northern frontier belongs to me, but I am hesitant to even confer a title to a small baron. And you, my good brother. Of course, it is a good thing that you have blocked the trolls from the northern frontier. However, this has also completely blocked the replacement of the lords of the northern frontier. If the trolls cannot invade, no one will be deprived of their title because of losing their territory. Therefore, there are more and more nobles in the northern frontier. But the land under the family's name is getting smaller and smaller. You always complain that I am not willing to reward your meritorious subordinates. But why don't you think about it? What can I do? Why don't I give you the title of Duke? You take care of the northern frontier. Marquis Garcia looked at his angry brother and did not know what to say for a moment. In the silence, The Duke of St. Hilda's face flashed an abnormal dark red, which was caught by Marquis Garcia. Brother, your injury. I won't die for the time being. The Duke of St. Hilda gasped for breath. But I won't be able to live for long. Marquis Garcia's expression was gloomy. Brother, help me this one time. I will bear all the costs, all the infamy. As long as you are willing to help me, the House of St. Hilda will definitely rise from the ashes. And this northern frontier, which is about to be renewed, will also be handed over to your biological daughter. Marquis Garcia did not speak. The Duke of St. Hilda still stared at his brother's eyes, as if he would not give up until he agreed. The room fell into a long silence. Only the crackling of the firewood could be heard from the fireplace. After an unknown period of time, Marquis Garcia finally let out a long sigh. All right, I will help you. Chapter 64. Back to the present. The air in Icestone City was filled with anxiety, unease, and excitement. The ignorant commoners didn't know what was going on. But all the nobles knew that it was time for them to fire their arrows. The Duke of St. Hilda's rejection left the nobles with no way out. Orders were passed down, and the army made the final preparations before the battle. A somber atmosphere enveloped the entire city. Tonight it would be hard to sleep. Knight Khan Sudo was one of those who couldn't sleep. He could only feel his heart beating so fast that it was frightening. After tossing and turning for a long time, Khan decided not to sleep. After putting on his clothes and leaving the house, Khan subconsciously walked towards his uncle's room. Good evening, Lady Penny. Khan hurriedly greeted the female housekeeper of the Oman family. Good evening, Knight of Khan. Are you looking for the Count as well? No. I'm just looking around. Khan hurriedly denied. He knew that Lady Penny was the housekeeper of the Oman family on the surface, but in reality, she was Count Oman's lover. And she wasn't just any lover. It was said that Count Oman had taken a liking to Penny not only because of her beauty, but also because of her wine-red pupils. The pupils of humans in this world were usually blue, black, or green. Wine-red pupils were rarely seen. As for Count Oman himself, his eyes were of the same color. To Count Oman, who didn't know much about genetics, although Penny was of low birth, for her to have pupils of the same color as his, she might be the descendant of some ancient bloodline. Regardless of whether this rumor was true or not, Penny's position in the Oman family was very high. This was a fact. Even the illegitimate child she gave birth to, Vala, was more important than other illegitimate children. Not only did Count Oman allow him to be baptized as a knight, he also spent a great deal of effort to help him marry the daughter of a baron, Colin's sister, Caitlin. That was why Khan was so respectful to a housekeeper. Moreover, he realized that Lady Penny was most likely going to the Count's room to thus. Khan tactfully chose not to disturb the Count's mood. After bidding farewell to Khan, Penny went to Earl Oman's room and entered. When Count Oman saw Penny enter without even knocking, he didn't reprimand her. Has everything been arranged? Yes, Penny answered casually. Then, he stepped forward to help Count Oman undo the buttons on his shirt. Earl Oman kissed the woman's forehead, and then began to help her undress. The Count's wife had been dead for many years, and he had never remarried. Instead, he acted more like a couple with his lover, Penny. If outsiders saw this scene, they would probably be very confused. How could a count treat a lowly lover like this? Even if Penny used to be a peerless beauty, now that she was over 40 years old, it was impossible for her to still be so attractive to the Count, right? Or were those wine-red pupils really that noble in the eyes of the Count? If that was really the case, then all the commoner girls with wine-red pupils in the northern frontier would probably gather in Fallen Eagle City. However, Count Almond did not seem to feel that there was anything wrong with his treatment of a commoner. Penny also seemed to be taking it for granted. What are you worried about? Count Oman saw the worry on Penny's face and suddenly asked. Nothing. Penny avoided the Count's eyes. Count Oman reached out and pinched Penny's chin, turning her gaze to him. You have to believe me. This is our best and only choice. But you are helping the House of St. Hilda consolidate its rule. Penny's eyes were filled with reluctance. There's no choice. Back then, when Marquis Garcia chose to pursue the trolls in the north instead of going south to Winter Castle, our plan had already failed. I don't know what agreement the two brothers reached, but Marquis Garcia actually resisted the temptation of becoming the lord of the northern frontier, and was willing to be his brother's sword. Moreover, it's that idiot Gombic's fault. An army of 300,000 was wiped out by 50,000. What a disgrace. In this situation, I have no choice but to follow the Duke of St. Hilda's secret order, and cooperate with him, to clean up the disobedient lords. Penny did not speak, only silently helping Count Oman unbutton his clothes. Seeing this, Count Oman was unhappy and asked again, "Did someone come looking for you?" Penny's hand paused, then she nodded lightly. Count Oman's eyes flashed, and he said in a low voice, "Don't believe those trolls. Remember, we are only using them, and they are also using us. Don't treat them as your own people. It's not the trolls." Penny shook her head, staring into Count Oman's eyes. "It's a letter from my brother." Count Oman's eyes narrowed. "What did he say?" "He said." Penny's eyes flashed with a hint of scrutiny. "He said you are betting on both sides." "Nonsense." Count Oman snorted coldly, placing his hands on Penny's shoulders, and pulling her in front of him. "Don't tell me you don't believe me either?" Penny stared at her man for a long time, before softly spitting out two words. "I believe you." Count Almond felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders, as he hugged Penny tightly. "Don't worry. I will definitely do what I promised you. Go to sleep." The next morning, the atmosphere in Icestone City had reached its peak. Groups of soldiers passed through the streets and gathered outside the South Gate. At this time, even the slowest commoner realized that something was about to happen. They immediately ran home and shut their windows, not daring to go out again. At the same time, 5 kilometers south of Icestone City, the silhouettes of an army appeared. The Golden Lion flag shone brightly under the sunlight. That was the House of St. Hilda's direct army, Golden Lion Army. And to the west of Icestone City was a black ocean. There was also an army there, the Black Cavalry. Dense killing intent filled the fields, causing the temperature in the air to drop. Count Dawson stood in front of the Black Cavalry formation, looking at the Golden Lion Army and the Feudal Lord Alliance Army in the distance. No one knew what he was thinking. At 9 o'clock in the morning, after the last round of negotiations had failed, an ear-piercing bugle sounded. The vanguard of the Golden Lion Army and the Feudal Lord Alliance Army gradually approached each other. Then battle cries echoed through the fields. Count Dawson looked at the two sides, fighting in the distance with a calm expression. He was waiting. When the main forces of both sides were completely entangled, they would not be able to easily break away. Finally, when it was almost noon, the battle between the Golden Lion Army and the Feudal Lord Alliance Army had reached its climax. Overall, the Feudal Lord Alliance Army had the upper hand. After all, they had the advantage in numbers. And at this time Count Dawson, who had been watching coldly from the sidelines, finally gave the order to attack. The wildly galloping warhorses caused the earth to shake. The thunderous sound of horse hooves struck everyone's hearts, causing them to involuntarily turn to look at the cavalry that had suddenly entered the battlefield. Those who had never faced the charge of the Black Cavalry would never be able to imagine what kind of scene it was. In the past, the Black Cavalry's targets had always been the trolls, but this time, there were finally humans blocking their path. When the soldiers of the Feudal Lord Alliance Army saw this scene, they immediately shouted in excitement. Because the Black Cavalry was charging towards the Golden Lion Army's formation. However, before they could be happy for long, they saw the Black Cavalry's path suddenly turn, and then, like a flood breaking through a dam, they charged towards the right wing of the Feudal Lord Alliance Army. Boom! The situation was instantly reversed. Chapter 65. Outside Icestone City, the thick smell of blood had yet to dissipate. Countless vultures were having their own carnival here. It had been 3 days since that tragic battle, but the atmosphere in Icestone City was still extremely stifling. In the plaza in the center of the city, corpses were gathered together and prepared to be burned. They were once important figures in the northern frontier, noble and elegant nobles, lords who ruled over a region. But now, they were being dragged around like dead dogs and thrown into the fire. This is the fate of the traitors. In the plaza, An officer was loudly reading out the crimes of these lords and nobles. The surrounding citizens watched all of this with fear and excitement. They couldn't understand why these nobles would betray the Duke of St. Hilda, whom they were loyal to. But when they saw the high and mighty nobles being beaten to the ground, their hearts were filled with an indescribable joy. Colin stood in the middle of them and looked at the strange and familiar faces in the plaza. He couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. The two brothers of the House of St. Hilda were truly ruthless. Nearly 100 feudal lords were slaughtered like chickens. Colin, let's go. The knighting ceremony is about to begin. You can't be late. Caitlin urged from the side. She wasn't used to the smell of blood here and kept covering her nose. All right, let's go. Some people were sad, while others were happy. It was as if this world was always maintaining a balance. When the old lords died, new lords would naturally be born, perhaps to dilute this somber atmosphere and calm the people. The Duke of St. Hilda decided to hold the knighting ceremony in Icestone City today. Logically speaking, the knighting ceremony in the northern frontier should be held in the Lion's Roar Castle in Winter City. But at this time, no one dared to oppose the Duke of St. Hilda, who was in the middle of a killing spree. The knighting ceremony was held in the main hall of Icestone City's Radiance Church. Colin had come here once before to buy holy water, but now for this conferring ceremony, this place had obviously been redecorated. The colorful glass had been polished until it was exceptionally bright. Under the sunlight, it reflected a gorgeous luster. All kinds of murals were hung on the walls of the hall. In the center, the statue of the god of light stood majestically, as if watching every noble present. When Colin came in, the place was already filled with nobles who had come to watch the ceremony. Although there were quite a lot of people, and it looked quite lively, Colin knew that most of these nobles were the generals of the Black Cavalry. They were all vassals of Marquis Garcia. There were only a few vassals who were truly loyal to the Duke of St. Hilda, because most of them had become corpses in the square. Apart from Colin, the only ones who could attend were the nobles led by Earl Amon, who had defected at the last minute. However, Colin knew that Earl Amon did not betray at all. This guy was a spy that the Duke of St. Hilda had placed in the allied suzerains. His goal was to incite the suzerains' dissatisfaction and lead them to fight against the House of St. Hilda. In the end, he was buried by the two brothers of the House of St. Hilda. Since 3 years ago, these few true big shots of the northern frontier had already begun to plot, eliminating all external and internal threats along the way in the northern frontier. Today it was finally over. Colin sighed in his heart. It seemed that the biggest suspect who had plotted against him was still at large. He did not know when he would be able to completely eliminate this threat. Accompanied by the melodious sound of a bell, the Duke of St. Hilda walked into the hall. All the nobles immediately stood up and bowed to welcome the Duke's arrival. It was Colin's first time meeting the master of the northern frontier. He looked to be about 50 years old, and was very fat. His hair was slightly white. Although he tried his best to straighten his back when he walked into the hall, Colin could see that he was not as strong as he wanted to be. Logically speaking, this was not the state that a knight in his prime should be in. However, Colin knew that although the Duke of St. Hilda had once been the champion of the northern frontier, and was even hailed as the 6th-level knight, who had the highest chance of entering the Saint Realm among the current generation of St. Hilda's knights. However, 5 years ago, after a duel with the previous giant demon emperor, the Duke was severely injured. From then on, not only did he lose all hope of entering the Saint Realm, he was unable to recover from the setback. His hair started to turn white, his back started to bend, and his body became fatter by the day. The powerful knight of the past had become a fat middle-aged uncle. Honorable lords, brave knights! The Duke of St. Hilda stood on the stage and said in a loud and clear voice, "Recently, the northern frontier has not been peaceful. The giant demons have invaded, and the lords have rebelled. However, under the protection of the God of Light, and with everyone's full support and valiant fighting, we have achieved the final victory. Victory! Victory!" Timely cheers came from below the stage, and all the nobles applauded and celebrated. The Duke of St. Hilda pressed his hands together and continued, "In order to commend those who have contributed greatly to this victory, I will confer titles to them one by one." Naturally, there was another round of cheers from below the stage. It had been a long time since a new noble had appeared in the northern frontier, and this time, it seemed that a large number of new nobles would be born. After all, so many old nobles had already vacated their positions and lands. Whether it was to appease the people or to better govern the northern frontier, the Duke of St. Hilda had to reward them generously. The first person to receive a reward was indeed the second most important person in the Black Cavalry, Earl Dawson. This trusted subordinate of Marquis Garcia was conferred the title of Marquis by the Duke. He was also the second Marquis by the northern frontier. From now on, Marquis Dawson would also leave the vassals of Marquis Garcia and pledge allegiance to the Duke of St. Hilda. This also indicated that after the Duke of St. Hilda had eliminated the two major threats in the northern frontier, he had finally begun to deal with the third threat, the Black Cavalry. And his method was not out of Colin's expectations, to divide and recruit. After that, as expected, a large number of corps generals of the Black Cavalry were conferred titles by the Duke. These new nobles born from the Black Cavalry, would they continue to listen to Marquis Garcia's orders in the future? Or would they change sides and pledge allegiance to a new master? Finally, Colin's name was announced. His sister, Caitlin, clapped excitedly, as if she was the one receiving the title. Amidst the cheers, Colin strode to the center of the hall and knelt on one knee in front of the Duke of St. Hilda. The Duke raised his longsword in front of him and said with a solemn expression, "Colin Angeli, you have used your courage, wisdom, and faith to prove your loyalty and value to the God of Light in me. Here, in the name of the Duke of St. Hilda, on behalf of the God of Light and His Majesty, I confer upon you the title of Viscount Angeli. I hope that you will use your loyalty and your life to protect this honor." After saying this, the Duke's sword pointed at Colin's head and shoulders. "I, Colin Angeli, swear on the souls of my ancestors that I will be loyal to the God of Light and the Duke of St. Hilda. Your will is my direction, your—" As Colin recited the oath, he was pleasantly surprised. Viscounts. It was actually a viscount. Chapter 66. How difficult was it to be promoted from a baron to a viscount's? The Angeli family's baron title was obtained by Colin's great-great-grandfather after he fought on the battlefield for half of his life. Since then, even though 3 generations of the Angeli family's barons had fought on the battlefield, and 2 of them had even died on the front lines, they were still unable to promote the family to a viscount's. Of course, this was because there were too many feudal lords in the northern frontier, and their metabolism was too slow. However, it also showed how difficult it was to be promoted. This time, Colin did not expect that not only would he inherit his father's baron title, but he would also be promoted to a viscount's. While he was pleasantly surprised, Colin also realized that his promotion was actually the result of a combination of factors. Firstly, most of the old feudal lords in the northern frontier had been wiped out by the 2 brothers of the House of St. Hilda, and a large amount of land had been recovered by the House of St. Hilda. This naturally made it easier for him to be promoted to a viscount. Secondly, Colin had also participated in the battle against the trolls, and he had gained a lot of credit. Although Colin's role in the battle was very small, and it was not an exaggeration to say that he was just a bystander, the Duke of St. Hilda obviously did not want to give all the credit to the generals of the Black Cavalry. Therefore, Colin was the only noble who was loyal to the Duke of St. Hilda, other than Marquis Garcia, and of course, the Duke would take special care of him. Thirdly, he did not know if Marquis Garcia and Vera had played any role in this matter. If the 2 of them had mentioned Colin in front of the Duke, then it would not be difficult for him to be promoted to a viscount's. In short, this time, Colin was awesome. The Angeli family had taken a big step forward under his leadership, and it was not an exaggeration to say that he had brought honor to their ancestors. Among the crowd, Caitlin was so emotional that tears were streaming down her face. She clenched her fists in front of her chest. She was probably comforting her dead father and asking him to rest in peace. After Colin finished his oath, an attendant walked up with a brand new set of Viscount's formal attire. It was a dark red velvet coat and black trousers, The coat was embroidered with the Angeli family emblem on the chest. Below the emblem were 2 silver stripes, which were the symbol of the title of Viscounts. Colin took it with both hands. Then, the attendant handed over the Viscount's rings and ribbons, as well as a piece of parchment with the seal of the Duke of St. Hilda. On the parchment, it was written that the new territory was conferred to the Angeli family. Colin held the pile of items and bowed to the Duke of St. Hilda again before leaving. Caitlin ran excitedly to Colin's side. She could barely contain her joy. But she knew that she had to pay attention to the situation. She only whispered in Colin's ear, "Colin, that's great. Father will be proud of you when he knows. The Angeli family has worked hard for so many years, and we've finally become a Viscount's family. Quick, quick, let me see where the new territory is." Colin looked at his excited sister, but his heart did not waver. After all, he did not have a strong sense of belonging to the Angeli family. Moreover, he wanted to know if his sister was really happy for him, or if she was just pretending. Just as Colin stared at Caitlin carefully, he suddenly noticed that the joy on her face froze. It was replaced by shock and confusion. "What's wrong?" Colin blinked and asked softly. Caitlin unfolded the parchment in front of Colin and asked in disbelief, "Look at the family's new fief. How could it be here?" Colin looked at the parchment in confusion, and then he was stunned. How could it be here? Did she write it wrong? Just as Colin and his sister looked at each other, the conferring ceremony continued. This time, Khan Sudwa's name was called. This eldest son of the Sudwa family, who had some grudges with Colin, walked excitedly to the center of the hall and knelt down on one knee. In the past 2 months, the situation at the northern frontier had changed drastically. To be honest, Khan had been at a loss and fearful. Fortunately, he remembered his father's last words and followed in the footsteps of his uncle, Earl Aldman. That was how he managed to survive this crisis. He had even made a great contribution. In Khan's opinion, if that annoying Colin could be conferred the title of Viscounts, then wouldn't the Sudwa family's title be promoted? However, just as Khan was waiting expectantly for the conferring ceremony, the Duke stabbed his long sword into the marble floor and questioned Khan. "Knight of Khan, tell me, what is loyalty?" "What?" Khan raised his head and looked at the Duke of St. Hilda blankly. The crowd suddenly quieted down. Khan's sister, Cynthia Sudwa, who Colin called Crazy Woman, was also shocked by the Duke's question. She clenched her fists and instinctively realized that something was wrong. Colin held the parchment in his hand and looked at the stunned Khan. He seemed to have suddenly realized something, and a cold smile appeared on his lips. "Loyalty, loyalty, of course it's. What is it?" The Duke of St. Hilda's expression was cold, and his sharp gaze seemed to have pierced through the pitiful knight kneeling in front of him. Under such a gaze, Khan only felt that his mind was blank, and he was not even sure what he was saying. The Duke of St. Hilda's tone was extremely cold. "You asked Charles to give up the title of Marquis in front of everyone. Is it out of loyalty? It's over. The Sudwa family is over." This was the thought of all the nobles present. Obviously, the Duke of St. Hilda was digging up old scores. When Khan was pushed out by Earl Oman to stand out, many people guessed that he would pay the price for it. Now the price had really come. Khan thought that by switching sides with Earl Oman, he would be able to write off his previous offense. But obviously, the Duke of St. Hilda did not intend to let the Sudwa family off so easily. The face and glory of the House of St. Hilda was not something that a small noble could casually trample on. Of course, the real reason why Charles voluntarily gave up his title was because of the pressure from Marquis Garcia. But Marquis Garcia had enough confidence to prevent the Duke's anger from pouring down on him. As for Khan Sudwa, he did not have this ability, so he could only become the Duke's target. Kill the chicken to warn the monkey. I. Looking at the cowardly Khan, the Duke of St. Hilda laughed coldly and suddenly said loudly, "Viscounts Colin, tell me, what is loyalty?" Everyone's eyes suddenly turned to Colin. Colin was stunned for a moment, but he quickly strode forward. He seemed to have some premonition about this. "Duke, I believe that loyalty is to give everything you have unconditionally, without asking for reasons, without distinguishing between right and wrong, without considering gains and losses. without asking for reasons, without distinguishing between right and wrong, without considering gains and losses. The Duke of St. Hilda carefully digested Colin's answer, a hint of admiration and deep meaning flashing in his eyes. Then, he threw the longsword in his hand directly to Colin and ordered, "Good. Then I order you to kill Khan Sudwa immediately." Yes. Before the nobles present could react, and even Khan himself was still kneeling on the ground in a daze, Colin had already caught the longsword thrown by the Duke. Then he swung it without hesitation. Swoosh! A silver light flashed. Blood splattered everywhere. Chapter 67. Thump! Thump! A round head rolled onto the ground. The spurting blood dyed the marble floor with a layer of gorgeous color. The entire place was silent. No one would have thought that a proper knighthood bestowment ceremony would turn out like this. The Duke of St. Hilda's order was very abrupt, and Colin's execution was even more abrupt. In reality, Colin had already expected the Duke of St. Hilda's order, because the Angeli family's new fief had the name Ice Stone City. Since the Su Duo family's fief had already been bestowed to the Angeli family, Colin naturally wouldn't be surprised that the Duke would settle the score with Khan at this time. But in the eyes of outsiders, the Duke and Colin seemed to have discussed this beforehand. It was a sudden attack on Khan. Even when Khan's head rolled onto the ground, the confusion in his eyes didn't even have time to turn into fear. No. A shrill cry broke the silence in the arena. Cynthia Su Duo charged forward like a madwoman, as if she wanted to avenge her brother. After Colin swung his sword, he immediately knelt on one knee towards the Duke of St. Hilda. At the same time, he raised the longsword high above his head with both hands. Colin completely ignored Cynthia, who was charging at him from behind. As expected, before Cynthia could reach Colin, she was stopped by a group of guards. "Why? Why? Your Grace, why? Colin! I'll kill you, I'll kill you." After the crazy woman was carried out of the hall by the guards, the Duke of St. Hilda smiled at Colin and said, "Very good, Knight Colin. I like your interpretation of loyalty. This sword's name is Blade of Judgment. 5 years ago, I used it to cut off the head of the last troll emperor. Now, I'm giving it to you. I hope you treat it well, and live up to its name, and the glory it represents." Colin's heart shook. He put away the longsword in his hand and said loudly, "Thank you, Your Grace, for your reward. I hereby swear that where your will points is where I swing my sword." The Duke of St. Hilda nodded in satisfaction and indicated that Colin could leave. Then the knighthood bestowment ceremony continued. However, everyone's gaze was intentionally or unintentionally glancing in Colin's direction. If Colin was promoted to viscounts at most, he would receive some envious gazes. Now, when he was given the Blade of Judgment by the Duke, everyone looked at him with unconcealable jealousy. Who would have thought that Duke St. Hilda would place such importance on a newly promoted viscount? Only Marquis Garcia, who had been silent all this while, furrowed his brows slightly when he saw the longsword in Colin's hand. When the last batch of new barons received their titles, the knighthood bestowment ceremony finally came to an end. However, the Duke of St. Hilda did not seem to have any intention of ending the ceremony immediately. Everyone present was not surprised. They were all holding their breaths as they waited for something. Charles. Finally, the Duke of St. Hilda read out his eldest son's name. Charles, who had been hiding in the back, trembled slightly when he heard this. Then he walked to the center of the hall, as if he was going to the execution ground, and knelt down on one knee in front of his father. "I heard that you want to atone for the 200,000 soldiers who died in battle." The Duke of St. Hilda's voice was emotionless. Charles lowered his head and sobbed. "Yes, father. I have let down your expectations, and I have let down the people of the northern frontier, and the 200,000 soldiers. Therefore, I am willing to give up my title as a marquis to atone for my mistakes." The Duke of St. Hilda did not speak. He only looked at his eldest son with a cold gaze. Charles did not raise his head, but he seemed to have understood his father's intentions. He slowly took off his marquis ring and removed his belt. Finally, he took off his ceremonial robes, folded them, and placed them in front of him. "Father, please forgive me for my sins. Charles prostrated himself on the ground, waiting for his father's judgment. After a long silence, the Duke of St. Hilda finally spoke. Charles, from today onwards, the glory of the House of St. Hilda has nothing to do with you. You will head to the northern frontier as an ordinary soldier and fight on the front lines against the trolls for the rest of your life, until the day the troll's city is captured. Yes, father. Charles kowtowed in a daze and stumbled as he retreated. The former first in line to the throne of the northern frontier left dejectedly. The nobles observing the ceremony continued to remain silent. They did not dare to do anything to attract the Duke's attention. Although the Duke's expression was calm, those who were familiar with him knew that the Duke must be full of anger at this time. No one would feel good if they were forced to abolish their chosen successor, not to mention the Duke of the Northern region, who was a man of his word. Obviously, this matter was a great provocation to his authority. However, he could only grit his teeth and swallow it. The atmosphere in the hall gradually became heavy. The ceremony was not over yet. The Lord of the Northern Frontier could not be without an heir. Since Charles had been deprived of his title, naturally, someone had to inherit the title of Marquis. And this person, who could it be? Colin quietly raised his head and glanced in the direction of Marquis Garcia. When they were hunting outside the city, Marquis Garcia had already told Colin about his deal with the Duke of St. Hilda. Therefore, he was very clear that the person who would inherit the title of Marquis should be Vera. Although according to the law, Vera should be ranked after the other two sons of the Duke. If the Duke insisted on making Vera the first in line of succession, no one would dare to object. Oh no, the only one who dared and was qualified to object was Marquis Garcia. However, Marquis Garcia obviously would not object. As for the imperial aristocratic Senate, perhaps they could have a strong binding force on ordinary nobles, but they did not dare to interfere with the succession of the House of St. Hilda. Even if Vera's succession was not legal, as long as the Duke of St. Hilda gave a reasonable reason, they would definitely accept it. This reason was very easy to find. For example, the second son was too weak, and the third son was too young. In short, when the Duke of St. Hilda and Marquis Garcia reached an agreement, there was nothing in the northern frontier that they could not decide. However, just as Colin was looking forward to hearing Vera's name, another name came out of the Duke's mouth. Adams. Colin suddenly raised his head and looked at the figure in the middle of the hall in shock. What is going on? Shouldn't it be Vera? When the Duke's second son, Adams St. Hilda, heard his father's call, he suppressed the ecstasy in his heart and strode forward, kneeling down on one knee in front of the Duke. In the name of the Duke of St. Hilda, I hereby confer upon you the title of Marquis. I hope that you will not disappoint. Colin was not interested in listening to the rest of the words. He quickly looked in the direction of Marquis Garcia. Then he saw Marquis Garcia's cold eyes. Betrayal. This was the betrayal of Luo Luo. Marquis Garcia had faced many temptations, but in the end, he kept his loyalty to his brother. However, he did not expect that he would be betrayed by his brother. The nobles who did not know anything were still celebrating for Marquis Adams. Even the ignorant Vera was happy for her brother. However, only Colin quietly lowered his head. The chaos in the northern frontier was far from over. Chapter 68. After the conferring ceremony, everyone left the church one after another. Most of the nobles were overjoyed. After all, this conferring ceremony was the largest in the northern frontier in recent years. The Duke of St. Hilda's generosity had calmed the nobles in the northern frontier. They all believed that the northern frontier would be even better in the future. Colin ignored his sister, who was chattering nonstop, and purposely stayed behind to chat with Marquis Garcia to test the thoughts of this big shot. Although Marquis Garcia did not flare up on the spot, Colin knew that the Duke of St. Hilda had completely angered Marquis Garcia because he did not keep his promise to make Adams his first successor. If the two brothers were putting on an act before, then the rift between them was real now, and it could no longer be easily mended. To be honest, Colin did not understand why Duke of St. Hilda would break his promise. It was not because Colin thought that Duke of St. Hilda should abide by the virtues of a knight. He was not that naive. Duke of St. Hilda was an old politician who had ruled the northern frontier for decades. Expecting him not to lie was like expecting a man not to cheat. What Colin did not understand was why Duke of St. Hilda would choose to fall out with his brother in such a way at this time. Duke of St. Hilda was too impatient and lacked political wisdom. If Colin was in Duke of St. Hilda's position, even if he did not want to pass the title to Vera, he would not kick Marquis of St. Hilda's position so quickly. At the very least, he would give the title to Vera first and recognize her as the first successor. He would then stabilize Marquis Garcia's position. Then, whether it was slowly weakening the Black Flag Army or building up another military force that could compete with them, it would be easier for him. After all, Vera would inherit the title of Marquis of St. Hilda's position and would not immediately become one of the Dukes of the North. She could still be stripped of her title in the future. Why be so impatient now? Of course, Colin didn't think that Marquis Garcia would dare to rebel at this time. After all, most of the feudal lords in the northern frontier had been eliminated, and the remaining ones had been pacified by the Duke. And the Black Flag Army's previous act of betrayal had already caused Marquis Garcia to bear the infamy of betrayer. Now, even if he stood out to deal with his brother, no lord would respond to his call. As for the Black Cavalry, he had already been roped in by the Duke with the tacit approval of Marquis Garcia. For example, Marquis Dawson, a vassal who was once loyal to Marquis Garcia, would he still admit that he was a member of the Black Cavalry after swearing allegiance to the Duke? Would they still choose to follow Marquis Garcia's orders without hesitation like before? What's more, the matter of the Duke of St. Hilda going back on his word was actually only known to a very small number of people. After all, the deal between the Duke of St. Hilda and Marquis Garcia was originally a secret. If Colin hadn't been regarded by Marquis Garcia as his future son-in-law, and thus learned of the details of this deal, he probably wouldn't have realized that the Duke of St. Hilda had betrayed his brother. If Marquis Garcia chose to rebel now, wouldn't the people of the northern frontier view it as a betrayal of his brother? Would Marquis Garcia be willing to bear this kind of infamy? Sir Marquis. Colin moved to Marquis Garcia's side and greeted him in a low voice. Marquis Garcia shot a glance at Colin, but didn't say anything. His footsteps didn't stop, and he continued to walk outside. Colin knew that this big shot was in a bad mood, so he didn't dare to say anything more, and followed him out of the church. When they were outside, Marquis Garcia immediately mounted his horse, and then looked at Colin, who had followed him out, and said in an indifferent tone, "Tell me, is your loyalty really regardless of reason, regardless of right or wrong?" Colin's heart trembled, and he cursed inwardly. Previously, when faced with the sudden attack of the Duke of St. Hilda, Colin had deliberately interpreted loyalty as unconditional obedience in order to curry favor with the Duke. He didn't expect that Marquis Garcia would misunderstand this. But there was no other way. At that time, how could Colin have predicted that these two brothers would fall out again? At that time, he thought that the Duke of St. Hilda, who had cleared the internal and external threats of the northern frontier, had undoubtedly become the real master of the northern frontier. If Colin wanted to continue to mingle in the northern frontier, develop the Angeli family, and even marry Vera, he must obtain the approval of the Duke of St. Hilda. Therefore, Colin took the initiative to flatter him. Moreover, when he saw his new fief, he had already realized the Duke's plan, and he also had a grudge against the Suduo family, so he was mentally prepared to become a knife in the Duke's hand. But who would have thought that the Duke would actually break his promise to Marquis Garcia at this time? This undoubtedly caused the northern frontier, which had just calmed down, to once again have a turbulent hidden worry. Therefore, Colin was once again faced with the choice of side. And this time, he really didn't know which side to choose. Although in his heart, he was more in favor of Marquis Garcia. This was not only because the Marquis had taught him almost everything in the Battle of the Icefield, but also because the Marquis had given him the retired Black Cavalry soldiers to help the Angeli family form a cavalry. He was really training Colin as his son-in-law. Moreover, from a moral point of view, this matter was indeed the Duke of St. Hilda's fault to his younger brother. He had broken his promise. However, at this moment, facing Marquis Garcia's questioning, Colin didn't know what to say for a while. Should he directly admit that what he had just said was nonsense? In this way, wouldn't his character setting collapse immediately? Who would dare to trust a person who could abandon his oath so casually? Just when Colin was stunned, Marquis Garcia had already left on his horse. Before he left behind one last sentence. Go and understand the origins of the blade of judgment in your hands, and then reconsider what true loyalty is. Looking at Marquis Garcia's departing figure, Colin stood there blankly for a while, not knowing what to do, until his sister, Caitlin, walked over with a puzzled expression and brought Colin back to the inn. In the next few days, Ice Stone City was peaceful. Marquis Garcia didn't do anything drastic, as if he had completely forgotten his brother's betrayal. However, on the night of the bestowment ceremony, Marquis Garcia left Ice Stone City. It was as if he didn't want to stay in this city for another second. Marquis Garcia's departure didn't attract too much attention. After all, this Marquis was used to being alone. Moreover, the true master of the northern frontier was still in the city. However, the Duke of St. Hilda didn't stay in Ice Stone City for too long. On the third day after the bestowment ceremony, he set out to return to Winter City. As the new master of Ice Stone City, of course Colin had to go see him off. It was a sunny morning, and a large group of northern frontier nobles gathered outside Ice Stone City's south gate. The one at the front was naturally the Duke of St. Hilda. Beside him was the newly promoted Viscount Angley. Colin, are you satisfied with the new territory I bestowed upon you? Your Grace, of course I am extremely satisfied. Colin's words weren't completely flattery, because the Angeli family's current territory was indeed very large. Originally, the Suduo family's territory was Ice Stone City and the surrounding area of about 30 kilometers. However, this territory wasn't directly connected to the Angeli family's original territory. There were also two barons' territories in between. However, these two barons had been beheaded in the previous rebellion, so the Duke simply bestowed these two territories to Colin as well. Thus, including the original Grey Castle town, Colin's current territory was the size of the original Viscount's territory and three barons' territories combined. This definitely exceeded the size of a normal Viscount's territory. If it wasn't for the fact that there was too much land in the northern frontier and too few lords, the Duke of St. Hilda wouldn't have been so generous. Haha, so are you satisfied? The Duke of St. Hilda asked with a smile. Colin blinked and also smiled. Of course not. No lord would be satisfied with the size of their territory. The Duke of St. Hilda laughed loudly, as if he was very satisfied with Colin's answer. After laughing for a while, the Duke said, "Did you know? My grandfather once said something similar." He raised his whip and pointed to the east. There is no point in going to the ice field in the north. It is too cold and barren. However, if you want to expand your territory, you can try to go to the east. After saying that, he didn't wait for Colin's response, and immediately whipped his horse and left. Colin froze in place, wondering what the Duke's last words meant. At this moment, a gorgeous carriage passed by Colin. The curtain of the carriage was lifted, revealing a beautiful face. "Colin, Miss Vera, my coming-of-age ceremony is in a month's time. Will you come?" "Of course, it would be my pleasure." Vera smiled sweetly and put down the curtain. The convoy slowly moved forward and gradually disappeared into the horizon. Colin stood outside the city gate for a long time, but he didn't watch the Duke's convoy leave. Instead, he looked to the east, where the Duke of St. Hilda had just pointed. That was the eastern border of the empire. There was also a small country sandwiched between the northern frontier and the eastern border. The Half-Elf Kingdom. Chapter 69. Following the departure of the Duke of St. Hilda, the rest of the lords of the northern frontier also left one after another. Ice Stone City also became deserted. Of course, this kind of desertion was only relative. Compared to the Angeli family's former fief, Grey Castle town, Ice Stone City was clearly much more lively. The lives of the citizens of the city seemed to have returned to their original trajectory. Although the lord of the city had changed, it didn't seem to affect them much. Compared to who was the lord of Ice Stone City, these citizens were more concerned about whether they had enough food to eat and whether they had enough clothes to wear. However, for some people this was an earth-shattering change. These people were, of course, the former lords of this city, the Su Duo family. After being stripped of their title and fief, the Su Duo family could only choose to leave quietly. Colin didn't plan on killing the people of the Su Duo family. After all, the unspoken rule of this world was to be lenient towards the losers. Of course, these losers had to be nobles. No one cared about the lives of the commoners. These failed nobles would become wandering knights, using their strength and loyalty in exchange for the Lord's shelter. They looked forward to the day when they could use their military exploits to regain their fief and title, restoring their family's glory. This was the world's leniency towards nobles who had lost their power. Because in the eyes of the people of this world, failure was only temporary, but bloodlines were passed down from generation to generation. Only noble bloodlines could give birth to great heroes. And these heroes who could turn the tide were the foundation of the human race in this world. Today, a family was exterminated, and the legacy of a noble bloodline was severed. Perhaps because of this, a hero who could save the human race in the future was killed. Of course, this was not allowed. Therefore, even if it was the Duke of St. Hilda, after executing the rebellious lords, he could only strip them of their titles and fief, but he wouldn't exterminate their family members. Colin obviously didn't dare to break this unspoken rule, unless he didn't want to continue living in the Radiant Empire. However, although he wouldn't exterminate the Su Duo family, there was one person among them that Colin didn't plan on letting go so easily. This person was, of course, the crazy woman who had caused trouble for him time and time again. Cynthia Su Duo. Still can't find them? Yes, Lord Viscounts. Obviously, Cynthia seemed to have expected that Colin would not let her off. Once the ceremony was over, she ran away without a trace. Colin frowned. He also felt that it was a little tricky. If a Tier 3 knight wanted to escape, it would be hard for him to catch him. What about that Su Duo family servant called Sar? I'm sorry, my lord. I didn't find it either. Colin snorted, feeling somewhat helpless. However, he didn't blame Knight Raymond too much. After all, the Angeli family had only recently taken over Icestone City, and could be considered a standard external force. In addition, Raymond didn't bring many soldiers with him from Grey Castle, so sealing off the entire city was simply unrealistic. Forget it, let's not look for it for now. Send someone to Fallen Eagle City to investigate. Perhaps Cynthia and Sar will appear there. Don't act recklessly after you find them. Just send someone to keep an eye on them. Yes, Lord. Colin felt that the most likely lord for the Su Duo family to rely on was Count Oman. After all, they were related by marriage. As for how to get them from Count Oman, Colin couldn't think of a way at the moment. Speaking of Count Oman, Colin still hadn't forgotten about the suspect who tried to kill him back then. Even now, he still hadn't figured out who it was. However, the biggest suspect right now was still Count Oman. As for his sister Caitlin, after interacting with her for a few days, Colin felt that she was less suspicious. After all, no one could act so realistically. Moreover, there was still no news of Caitlin's husband, Knight Vala. In Colin's opinion, that guy might have really died in some unknown corner of the battlefield. However, Caitlin obviously wasn't willing to accept this fact. She continued to inquire about Vala from every caravan that came back from the icefield. She even personally made a few trips to the icefield to look for her husband. This was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Colin couldn't persuade her, so he could only let her do as she wished. He was also very busy right now. There were a lot of things in the new territory that he had to deal with. At this time, the person Colin looked forward to the most was the old butler of the Angeli family, Eamon. If he was in Icestone City, he would definitely be able to help Colin take care of these things in an orderly manner. Where are Eamon and the others now? When will they reach Icestone City? Colin asked this question almost every day. Soon. Probably tomorrow, at the latest the day after tomorrow. Knight Raymond was also somewhat helpless. With this world's communication methods, he couldn't grasp Eamon's exact location in real time. Got it. Go do your work. Colin sighed and didn't make things difficult for Raymond. Yes. After Raymond left, Colin once again buried his head in the pile of documents on the table. After an unknown amount of time, the candles on the table had almost burned out. Colin rubbed his sore eyes and ordered loudly, "Change the candles for me." However, the servant outside the door didn't respond. Colin waited for a moment and called out again, but still didn't receive a response. He frowned, thinking that the guy outside was dozing off again. So he got up and walked towards the door. Click. The moment he pulled open the door, Colin suddenly realized that something was wrong. But just as he was about to quickly retreat, a long sword suddenly pierced through the door, stabbing towards his heart. Bang! In the blink of an eye, Colin immediately leaned back and fell to the ground, dodging the sword. The dazzling holy light surged like a tide, and the wooden door exploded with a bang, sending wood shavings everywhere. Colin hurriedly rolled and quickly got up from the ground. Without looking back, he rushed towards the blade of judgment, hanging on the wall. However, the assassin was even faster. Before Colin could touch his weapon, a sharp pain came from his back. Thump! The injured Colin fell to the ground. However, there wasn't much panic on his face. He struggled to turn his head, leaning against the wall to look at the intruder. It was indeed that crazy woman, Cynthia. Cough cough, did you come to kill me yourself? Or did someone order you to come? Colin asked seriously. Do I need someone to order me to kill you? Cynthia slowly approached Colin, gritting her teeth. Colin was a little disappointed, as if hoping that she was ordered by someone. But he didn't expect that this woman was really a lunatic who didn't care about the consequences. If you kill me, you won't live either. Cynthia laughed coldly, not caring about Colin's threat. Gee! The longsword pierced through Colin's chest. Cough cough. Colin's face was twisted in pain, but he still didn't give up and asked, "Is there really no one who ordered you to kill me? Not even Earl Oman?" Cynthia obviously didn't expect Colin to be concerned about this before he died. She shook her head and laughed coldly. "No. Crazy woman." Colin laughed coldly and scolded. Faced with Colin's scolding, Cynthia actually laughed excitedly. Cynthia, who was immersed in the thrill of revenge, didn't notice that Colin's eyes were gradually becoming fierce and bloodthirsty. He completely ignored the long sword that pierced through his chest and rushed forward, grabbing Cynthia's neck. Then he bit her. Chapter 70. Could teeth bite a person to death? If it was a lion, tiger, or other beasts, perhaps it could. But if it was a human, then the threat would be greatly reduced. Especially if it was a human with a sword in his chest. Cynthia thought so too. So when she saw the struggling Colin biting her neck, she did not panic at all. She even felt disdain. As Colin's actions were rushed and sudden, it was completely out of Cynthia's expectations. So when she wanted to dodge, it was already too late. Since she could not dodge, then she would not dodge. Cynthia allowed Colin to bite her neck, while she frantically twisted the sword in Colin's chest, trying to crush his heart. However, no matter how she twisted the sword, Colin did not show any signs of exhaustion. Instead, he bit even harder. At this moment, Cynthia finally started to panic. And she realized that Colin was actually sucking her blood. This lunatic. But before Cynthia could try to break free from this crazy man, a tremor from the depths of her soul instantly made her lose consciousness. And Colin was still lying on Cynthia, who was gradually falling to the ground, sucking continuously. Ah, such a sweet taste. He could not extricate himself. Actually, when Cynthia lost consciousness, Colin already knew that the danger was over. But he did not want to get up from her body. A primitive instinct from the depths of his blood made him unable to stop. Suck. Suck. Suck her dry. Heh. Previously, when Colin drank blood, although he enjoyed it quite a bit, but he did not have this kind of addictive feeling. But at that time, Colin drank the blood of the dead. Unlike now, he was completely gnawing on her raw. Could it be that this was the correct way to be a vampire in this world? The last bit of rationality in his mind told Colin that he must stop sucking immediately. Otherwise, Cynthia would really be sucked dry. Of course, he was not worried that this crazy woman would die. In fact, based on what this crazy woman did to him, Colin could totally kill her without any psychological barriers. However, he definitely wouldn't use such a method. Although Colin had guessed that he would become a creature similar to a vampire from the beginning of his transmigration, He did not wish to become an inhumane demon, a wild beast that was crazy for blood. Stop. Stop. Colin tried to leave Cynthia's neck with the last shred of rationality in his mind. However, he was horrified to discover that he couldn't break free at all. This wasn't just because of the feeling of addiction that he didn't want to break free. Objectively speaking, there was an inexplicable force that tightly bound him and Cynthia together, making it impossible for them to separate. What's going on? Colin began to panic. Large amounts of blood flowed into his mouth, causing his stomach to swell. On the other hand, Cynthia, who was on the ground, had turned extremely pale, and her body was visibly shriveling. Gulp. Gulp. In the dark and quiet room, there was only this eerie sound. Just when Colin thought that he was going to suck Cynthia dry, he suddenly realized that he could no longer suck any blood. Just when he finally heaved a sigh of relief and was about to get up, he suddenly realized that he was still unable to break free from Cynthia's body. What's going on? Just when Colin was bewildered, a strong suction force suddenly came from the wound on Cynthia's neck. This woman actually started to suck Colin's blood. This time, Colin was scared out of his wits. He frantically struggled, trying to break free from Cynthia. However, it was all in vain. It was as if a mysterious ritual was in progress, and there was no way to interrupt it. Colin was extremely regretful at this moment. Why did he have to bite this crazy woman for no reason? Now he wouldn't be sucked dry by her, right? Also, what the hell was this world's vampire setting? Why was sucking blood so dangerous? Just as Colin was infuriated, Cynthia's shriveled body slowly became plump again. As for Colin's face, it was obvious to the naked eye that he was turning pale. At this moment, Cynthia was a veritable juicer concubine. What was worse was that what she was sucking was not the blood in Colin's stomach that originally belonged to her, but Colin's own blood. Colin had already given up on struggling. He realized that the two of them were in the middle of some kind of ritual. And this ritual, even he could not interrupt it. Not knowing how long had passed, just when Colin thought that he was about to become a dry corpse, the suction force in Cynthia's body finally disappeared. Colin quivered and quickly pulled out his teeth. Then he quickly moved away from Cynthia, afraid that he would be sucked again. Phew, phew. Colin gasped for air. A feeling of relief after surviving a disaster spontaneously arose. After this near-death experience, he immediately swore he would never eat raw again. Although when he first sucked Cynthia's blood, the addictive pleasure made him intoxicated. But later on, the feeling of being sucked back was like going through purgatory. Colin checked his body with lingering fear. Other than the harmless long sword in his chest, the only threat was that he had lost too much blood. In that inexplicable ritual just now, Cynthia had actually sucked away close to half of the blood in his body. The large amount of blood loss made Colin's already pale face even paler. At a glance, he did not look like a human at all. But what made Colin slightly relieved was that there was a lot of Cynthia's blood in his stomach. The amount seemed to be about the same as what Cynthia had sucked away. Could it be that this was actually a blood exchange ritual? If he had a choice, Colin would definitely not want to exchange blood with this crazy woman, Cynthia. If he knew that such an uncontrollable thing would happen, Colin would definitely pretend to be dead first. And then when the other party was not paying attention, he would counterattack. As long as Cynthia was dead, sucking her blood again should not cause such a situation. But it was too late to regret now. Colin had never thought that such an accident would happen to Rana. Since it had already happened, Colin did not have any more meaningless regrets. He started to check his body to see if sucking the blood of a high-ranked knight had allowed him to successfully advance. But he was quickly disappointed. This high-ranked female knight's blood did not give Colin any signs of advancing. No, not only did he not advance, after Colin carefully checked again, he was shocked to find that he had actually regressed. He, who was originally a knight of the second rank, had actually regressed to the first rank. Colin was so angry that he almost vomited blood again. What kind of ritual was this? But when Colin calmed down again, he found that there was an inexplicable mysterious connection between himself and Cynthia, who was still lying on the ground. It was as if he could control that crazy woman. So he tried to wake up Cynthia, who he did not know if she was dead or alive. Get up. Get up. Then, the originally silent Cynthia suddenly opened her eyes. She quickly climbed up from the ground and knelt on one knee in front of Colin. There was no longer any hatred on her face, and in its place was complete obedience. She opened her red lips and said to Colin in an incomparably respectful tone, "Master." Chapter 71. Sir Viscounts, are you all right? Knight Raymond's anxious voice came from outside the door, but before he could rush into the room, he heard Colin's voice. "Guard outside, don't come in." Raymond stopped in his tracks, but when he saw the corpses of the guards and the broken door, he worriedly asked again, "Sir Viscounts, are you really all right? Did an assassin break into your room?" "I'm fine. The assassin has been subdued by me. Guard outside the door, don't let anyone come near." "Yes." Raymond heaved a sigh of relief and concentrated on guarding outside. After sending Raymond away, Colin turned his attention back to Cynthia. Everything that happened just now was too strange. His mind was still in a mess. "What did you just call me?" "Master." "Who am I?" "You are my master." "No, I asked for my name." "Colin Angelo." "Your name?" "Cynthia Sudo." "Why are you here?" "I tried to assassinate you, master." Hearing this, Colin confirmed that this Cynthia still had her memories. But why did it suddenly become like this? "Why did you try to assassinate me?" "Because you are my brother's murderer." "Then do you still want to kill me now?" "No." "Why?" "Because master's safety is more important than anything else." Colin blinked, as if he realized something. Legend says that vampires can create descendants that are infinitely loyal. Could it be that he just created a blood descendant by accident? "Stand up. Kneel. Crawl." Colin issued a series of orders, and he was surprised to find that Cynthia followed all of them meticulously. Even the last extremely humiliating order, she did not hesitate at all. Looking at Cynthia crawling on the floor like a bitch, Colin's heart was filled with joy. "Who asked you to always go against me? Who asked you to kill me? This is your end. Bark like a dog. Woof woof woof." Haha. Colin was overjoyed. However, in the process of laughing, he pulled on his wound, and a sharp pain caused him to be unable to laugh. Only then did he realize that he had not pulled out the sword from his chest. "Come here and help me pull out the sword," Colin ordered Cynthia. "Chi." Pulling out the sword, Colin let out another miserable howl. "Lord Viscounts, are you all right?" Raymond, who was guarding the door, was alarmed by the scream and hurriedly asked, "I'm fine, don't come in." "Yes." Although Raymond was puzzled, he still stood guard outside the door out of loyalty and trust for Colin. Colin leaned against the wall for a while. Looking at Cynthia, he suddenly ordered, "Come, stab me with your sword." This time Cynthia didn't move. "Why aren't you stabbing?" "I can't hurt master." This answer made Colin understand that his safety took precedence over his orders. "Then stab yourself." Chi. Cynthia didn't hesitate to stab herself in the chest. Then she let out a groan. "Pull it out." Cynthia pulled out the sword again. Colin carefully looked at her and found that other than the small amount of blood at the beginning, there was no major bleeding. It seemed that she also had the ability to control her own blood. Moreover, this kind of injury that would be fatal to a normal person didn't seem to affect Cynthia too much. In addition, her muffled groans and pained expression showed that she could feel pain. These characteristics were almost exactly the same as Colin's. Colin's interest was suddenly piqued. Previously, in order to understand the settings of this world's vampires, he thought of a few extreme experiments. However, he didn't dare to do it on his own body. He was afraid that he would accidentally kill himself if he wasn't careful. Now he felt that he had found a perfect experimental subject. Beheading? Bleeding? Stuffing garlic? Leather whip dripping wax? Colin was thinking about which experiment to start with, but suddenly hesitated. After all, this was his first blood descendant. It would be a waste to play with her to death so quickly. Moreover, death might even be a form of release for this woman. So Colin decided to play with her a bit more. When he's done, he'll send this crazy woman down to meet her brother. At this time, he suddenly realized another problem and asked, "Will you tell anyone about what happened tonight?" "I won't." Why? The secret of the blood descendant's inheritance cannot be leaked. Colin was completely relieved, but he was surprised to find that Cynthia actually knew the term blood descendant. How much do you know about the blood descendant? The blood descendant is a race created by Master. What else? Cynthia shook her head. Obviously she didn't know any more information. Colin was a bit disappointed. After thinking for a while he asked, "What level are you now?" "3rd level." It didn't change. Colin was a bit confused. Why was he the only one who dropped a level? "Give me your blood," Colin ordered again. Cynthia didn't hesitate to use her sword to cut her wrist, and dripped the blood into a cup on the table. When the cup was almost full, Colin ordered again. "Okay, give it to me." Cynthia then controlled the bleeding on her wrist, and passed the cup to Colin. Gulp. Gulp. Colin drank it all in one gulp. After waiting for a while, there was no reaction. "Give me another cup." Cynthia let the blood continue to flow into the cup, and gave it to Colin after it was full. After another cup, Colin found that there was still no reaction. Colin didn't give up, and let Cynthia fill another cup. After 3 cups, there was still no sign of advancement. Colin looked at the pale Cynthia, and swallowed the words, "One more cup," that was about to come out of his mouth. If she drank any more, she would probably die. But what was going on? Wasn't the blood of a high-level knight supposed to help him advance? Why didn't it work? Could it be that the blood of a bloodkin had no effect on him? Colin thought for a moment, and then shouted towards the door. "Raymond, come in." "Yes, Sir Viscounts." Raymond quickly walked into the room, and first checked on Colin, and after seeing that he was fine, he stared at Cynthia with vigilance. The smell of blood in the room, and the bloody sword in Cynthia's hand, made this loyal knight's heart tighten. "Raymond, the castle's defense still needs to be strengthened. How could you let someone sneak in?" In fact, this matter couldn't be blamed on Raymond. After all, this castle originally belonged to the Suduo family, and Cynthia knew this place like the back of her hand. Raymond, on the other hand, had just moved in here, and wasn't familiar with the environment. To prevent a third-step knight like Cynthia from sneaking in was really too difficult. "Yes, Sir Viscounts, you are right. This is my fault. Please punish me." Raymond didn't explain, and only knelt on one knee in front of Colin, willing to accept the punishment. "Yes, you should be punished." Colin actually nodded, and then ordered Cynthia, "Knock him out." Bang! Raymond didn't have time to react, and the scabbard in Cynthia's hand had already smashed into the back of his head. Colin looked at the fallen Raymond, and hesitated for a moment. Then he ordered Cynthia, "Let's go. Bite him." Chapter 72. If someone were to barge into Colin's room, they would see a scene that would make their blood boil. A man and a woman were entangled on the ground. The woman's teeth were biting the man's neck, greedily sucking on it. Colin, on the other hand, was sitting on the side with his legs crossed, admiring this strange and bloody scene with great interest. At the same time, he also guessed that the accident that happened when he was eating Cynthia was probably some kind of inheritance ceremony of the blood breeds. Perhaps it should be called the embrace. And after Cynthia was embraced by him, she became his blood descendant. As a blood kin, she could not harm Colin. She also had to listen to Colin's orders unconditionally. She also could not reveal the secrets of the blood breeds to outsiders. These 3 iron rules that were engraved in Cynthia's mind made Colin feel completely at ease with her. The only thing that made Colin disappointed was that after becoming his blood kin, Cynthia's blood could no longer help him advance. Moreover, creating a blood kin seemed to require a drop in rank. This made Colin a little depressed. But at the same time, he also understood that this godly skill that could turn an enemy into a loyal servant, if there were no necessary costs and restrictions, then it would be too invincible. If that was the case, Colin would only need to bite anyone he saw, and it wouldn't be long before the whole world would become the blood breed's paradise. However, he still had to continue experimenting with what kind of setting the embrace was. Now he was testing whether the blood kin could create another blood kin through the embrace. At this time, Cynthia and Raymond's embrace ceremony was nearing its end. "What rank are you now?" Seeing Cynthia let go of the wound, Colin quickly asked. Second rank. This was a drop in rank. Colin nodded, then looked at Raymond. Raymond. Knight Raymond opened his eyes. After a short moment of confusion, he immediately woke up. Master. Hearing Raymond call him Master, and not Lord Viscounts, Colin knew that the embrace was a success. He pointed at Cynthia and asked, Then who is she? She is also my master. Colin frowned and continued to ask, If my orders conflict with hers, who will you listen to? I'll listen to you, Raymond said to Colin. Why? Because you are her master. Colin stroked his chin. He suddenly felt that this blood tribe inheritance was quite interesting. It was as though a blood race genealogy had been imprinted into their minds, allowing them to distinguish who was the true ruler. What's your level now? Colin asked again. Second rank. This was Raymond's original rank. Colin could basically confirm now that the vampire, who performed the embrace, would pay the price of losing one level of strength, while the vampire who received the embrace would maintain the same strength. Give me your blood. Colin passed over a cup and ordered Raymond. Yes. Without any hesitation, Raymond cut his arm open, and fresh blood flowed into the cup. All right, that's enough. Seeing that the blood was about to spill out of the cup and Raymond showed no signs of stopping, Colin hurriedly called for him to stop. He didn't want his own vampire to die from excessive blood loss. Drinking Raymond's blood in one gulp, Colin carefully felt the changes in his body. However, the surprise didn't happen. Other than replenishing stamina, Knight Raymond's blood couldn't help Colin level up. Colin completely gave up. It seemed that this shortcut wouldn't work. After understanding the price and limitations of the embrace, Colin knew that creating a vampire without limit wouldn't work. Taking out the parchment he kept, Colin prepared to record these new discoveries. But just as he was about to write, Colin realized a problem. The two vampires he developed were both knights. Then could other professions be developed into vampires? What about non-professionals? Thinking of this, Colin immediately had Raymond make a trip to Ice Stone City's prison. Soon Raymond came back with two death row prisoners. One was a rank 1 warrior, and the other was a normal person who didn't have any profession. When the two death row prisoners saw Colin, they thought that they were about to be executed and immediately begged for mercy. Colin felt that they were too noisy, so he had Cynthia knock them out one by one. Then, his gaze hesitated between Cynthia and Raymond, and finally chose Raymond. Raymond, go bite him. Colin pointed at the rank 1 warrior. Raymond didn't mind the stench of this guy, who had just been fished out of prison, and directly bit him. After a long time, Raymond had almost sucked the death row warrior dry, but the expected backlash still hadn't come. Colin rubbed his chin, feeling that the warrior profession probably couldn't become a vampire. Before, when he used the embrace on Cynthia, and when Cynthia used the embrace on Raymond, there was a backlash when they were halfway through sucking the blood. And now this, Colin didn't call for a stop, wondering if a miracle would happen. However, the miracle didn't happen. The death row soldier was directly sucked dry by Raymond, turning into a dried corpse. The embrace failed. Although he didn't have much hope, Colin still wanted to give it a try and let Raymond use the embrace on the non-professional death row prisoner. If even a warrior couldn't do it, then this guy who wasn't even a warrior probably couldn't become a vampire. Another round of sucking. Poor Raymond, because he had sucked too much blood, vomited a few times along the way, but still, he didn't succeed in using the embrace on the non-professional death row prisoner. Colin also couldn't find other professions for the time being, such as mages, warriors, rangers, etc., to do this experiment, so he could only give up. Currently, it seemed that only knights could receive the embrace and become a vampire. Colin wrote down this strange setting on the parchment and couldn't help but feel puzzled. Why did it have to be a knight? Moreover, the blood of a high-level knight and the holy water of the church could help him advance. This was a very strange point. Could it be that the blood breeds of this world had some kind of relationship with the Church of Glory? Colin shook his head and temporarily put this thought aside. The current him didn't have the right to investigate the mystery behind this. When he was strong enough to drink pure holy water like it was water, Maybe he could test the relationship between the god of glory and the blood breeds. However, the most important thing now was to develop his own territory and build an army loyal to him. Originally, Colin wanted to use the embrace to obtain an army of absolute loyalty. But after discovering the harsh conditions of the embrace, he gave up. Vampires were destined to be precious and rare. Therefore, they had to be used in the most appropriate place. Thinking of this, Colin immediately ordered Cynthia, immediately head to Fallen Eagle City and pledge your loyalty to Earl Oman. Yes. Chapter 73. Lord Charles, are you all right? The maid saw Knight Charles, who was walking unsteadily and almost fell, and hurriedly went forward to help him. I'm not drunk. Generally speaking, 70 to 80% of those who said this were really drunk. The maid was already used to Knight Charles's drunken state. She knew that Knight Charles would go to the tavern to drink almost every day, and would not return until he was completely drunk. This retired officer of the Black Cavalry, after switching allegiance to Colin under the orders of Marquis Garcia, it was as if he had become a different person. The iron-blooded knight who had once galloped on the battlefield and killed trolls until they cried like ghosts and howled like wolves had completely disappeared. Only an alcoholic who could not hold a sword steadily and had nothing to do every day could only rely on alcohol to numb himself. The maid struggled to help the dizzy Knight Charles onto the bed and asked softly, "Sir, do you need some water?" Knight Charles did not respond. After the maid heard the other party's thunderous snoring, she shook her head helplessly. She could only carefully take off the other party's coat and shoes, cover him with a blanket, and then get up and leave. The door was gently closed. But after a while, it was opened again. Colin walked in. "Charles? Knight Charles?" Colin called out twice, and even pushed Charles's arm. But there was no response. "Hey Charles, I order you to get up immediately." Colin raised his voice, and even pinched the other party's nose mischievously. Huff huff. Charles's breathing was obstructed. After struggling for a while, he opened his mouth and gasped for breath. But he still did not wake up. Colin rolled his eyes. Colin originally had high hopes for this retired officer of the Black Cavalry. In his opinion, Knight Charles and the dozen or so retired soldiers of the Black Cavalry with him were excellent candidates for instructors. They were the cavalry seeds he had always dreamed of. However, it was a pity that not everyone could accept the cruel reality and stand up again after suffering a heavy blow. This was especially true for soldiers like Knight Charles, who valued glory as much as his life. His retirement from the Black Cavalry was a huge blow to him. It almost completely destroyed this tough guy. Originally, Colin was almost ready to give up on this guy. But now he had a better idea. Colin slowly revealed his two sharp canine teeth and was about to bite down. But he still stopped. If he guessed correctly, the complete embrace ritual should be able to create conscious spawns. Then, how would he explain this to Knight Charles? Colin rubbed his chin. He felt that he couldn't forcefully convert her while she was asleep without her consent. In that case, he might not be able to get a loyal subordinate. Thus, Colin sat down on the chair in the room again, thinking about what to say later. When Knight Charles woke up again, it was already close to noon. "Shui, someone come. Give me water." The moment Charles woke up, he yelled for the maids. Soon, a cup of water was handed in front of Charles. Charles took it and put it in his mouth. But from the corner of his eye, he saw the person standing in front of his bed. Not a maid. Puffed. Charles spat out all the water he had just drunk. Then he hurriedly got out of bed and bowed. "Sir Viscounts, why are you here?" Colin sat back on the chair and waved at Charles with a smile. "Don't be nervous, I'm just here to see you." Charles was embarrassed. "You can send someone to summon me. You don't have to come here personally." "I sent someone, but they didn't seem to be able to wake you up, so I came here myself." Charles was even more embarrassed and apologized repeatedly. "I'm sorry, Sir Viscounts, I drank a little too much last night." "Only last night?" Colin smiled. "Please rest assured, I will control my drinking in the future. This won't happen again." Hearing Charles's promise, Colin was not relieved. If Marquis Garcia stood in front of Charles and asked him to make such a promise, Perhaps Charles would really carry it out meticulously. But if it was Colin himself, he felt that he did not have such prestige. So Colin followed the plan he had thought of last night and asked, "Knight Charles, I can understand your pain, and I've found a way to help you return to the battlefield." "Really?" Charles suddenly raised his head, his eyes finally shining. But at the same time, a trace of disbelief flashed through his heart. In order to heal his injuries, Marquis Garcia had also approached the Church of Glory. But the answer he received was that only a priest above the level of a cardinal could perform the healing technique of limb regrowth. A cardinal? There were only 3 cardinals in the entire Church of Glory. How could such an important person be willing to waste his divine power to heal a small knight like him? So Charles was in despair. But now, Colin had given him a glimmer of hope. "I can't guarantee success. Also, this method has a certain price." Colin's cautious attitude not only did not disappoint Charles, it made him trust Colin even more. "As long as I can hold my sword tightly again, I'm willing to pay any price." "Are you sure? This treatment method may make you lose your mind and turn you into a muddle-headed beast." Charles laughed bitterly. "Lord Viscounts, I'm now a muddle-headed beast. Leaving the battlefield, I'd rather die." "Have you thought it through?" Charles knelt on one knee in front of Colin and nodded solemnly. "I've thought it through. As long as you can help me recover my fingers, I swear in the name of my ancestors to the God of Glory that I'll be at your disposal for the rest of my life." Although Charles had already sworn loyalty to Colin, he had done it under the orders of Marquis Garcia. But this time, he was willing to do it. Colin felt Charles's determination and handed him a mug. "There's a knockout drug in this water. The treatment ritual later requires you to be unconscious because the process will be painful." After hearing about the knockout drug, Charles still took the mug and drank it in one gulp. He did not even listen to Colin's explanation. Colin raised his eyebrows. He was moved by Charles's determination and trust. After a while, Charles fell asleep under the influence of the knockout drug. Colin walked over, revealed his sharp canine teeth, and bit Charles's neck. Sure enough, just like when he first embraced Cynthia, after Colin sucked for a while, he noticed a suction force coming from Charles's wound. This time Colin did not run away. He suppressed the panic in his heart and allowed his blood to flow into Charles's body through his canine teeth. Slowly, wisps of blood-red smoke floated out of the 2 of them. The smoke was like a living creature, drawing regular curves on the ground. It was like a magic circle. There were more and more curves, more and more complicated, more and more mysterious. In a trance, low murmurs that sounded like sleep talk echoed in Colin's ears. The voice grew louder and louder, as if it was announcing something. "The condensation of blood is my spirit. Lord of blood, immortal and indestructible. With my blood, I bestow thee my inheritance." Chapter 74. Knock, knock, knock. "Come in." Raymond walked into the room and bowed. "Sir Viscounts, Steward Aemon and the Knight of Rigo have successfully arrived at Icestone City." "Yes, I understand." Colin had just completed the embrace on Knight Charles, and his face was a bit pale. "Let them settle down and meet me in the study." "Yes." After Raymond left, Colin looked at the still unconscious Charles and tried to order, "Get up, Charles, get up." However, Charles didn't respond. Colin frowned. He wasn't sure if the embrace ceremony was considered a success. Furthermore, he was shocked to discover that his cultivation level had actually decreased. Colin was originally a rank 2 knight, but after this embrace ceremony, he actually dropped to rank 1. He just didn't know if this drop in rank was temporary or permanent. However, he was still somewhat mentally prepared for this. A complete embrace ceremony probably wouldn't come without a price. Colin was already very surprised that he could create blood thralls without paying a price. If it wasn't for the fact that blood thralls couldn't continue to create the next generation of blood thralls, he would have been very surprised. If the blood thralls couldn't produce new blood thralls, Colin estimated that he could even create a vampire version of Resident Evil in this other world. Originally, he wanted to wait for Knight Charles to wake up before doing further experiments, but considering that Steward Aemon and the Knight of Rigo were still waiting for him, he didn't delay any longer and got up to leave Charles's room. When Knight Charles wakes up, have him meet me in the study, Colin ordered the maid guarding the door. Yes. Arriving at the study, Colin had just taken a sip of water when he saw Raymond walk in. Behind him was the Angeli family's old steward, Eamon, and the family's knight, Rigo Morben. Master. Sir Viscounts. Haha, you're finally here. Come sit. You've had a hard journey. What would you like to drink? Coffee will be fine. The knight of Rigo rubbed his big bald head, and hesitated for a moment before following behind Eamon and saying, Same for me. Colin glanced at Leg with a smile. He had noticed Leg's hesitation just now, so he ordered the attendant at the door. Go prepare 2 cups of coffee and a glass of ale. Yes. Then Colin turned to look at Leg. If you want a drink, just say it. We haven't seen each other in a while. Why are you being so courteous with me? Hee, thank you, Lord Viscounts. Leg grinned, his ugly face smiling like a chrysanthemum. Leg was Raymond's elder brother. These 2 brothers of the Morben family became wandering knights when their family declined. They later pledged their loyalty to Baron Angeli, and had a good relationship with Colin. Especially Leg, this tall and strong man was very talented in martial arts. When Baron Angeli was not at home, he was the one who acted as Colin's martial arts teacher. Therefore, when Colin saw this old acquaintance, although he was no longer the youth from before, he still instinctively felt a sense of familiarity. The 3 people in the study, Eamon, Leg and Raymond, could be said to be the core of the Angeli family. As for the members of the side branches of the Angeli family, they were not outstanding people. Colin would only provide them with good food and drink, and give them some simple things to do, but he would not rely on them too much. Perhaps when Knight Charles woke up, he could also join this core circle. The attendant quickly brought in coffee and ale. Colin exchanged a few pleasantries with everyone, then got to the main topic. Eamon, I need you to immediately take over the daily affairs of the territory. Also, find a few candidates for clerks and tax officers. Make a list and give it to me. I will finalize and assign them to each town. Yes. Although the family territory has expanded a lot this time, the family's financial situation will probably go through a difficult period. Also, Icestone City has just been ransacked by the trolls and needs to rest. I don't want to raise taxes at this time. Therefore, other than the daily necessities, do not do anything extravagant. Everything will be simple. Yes, master. You are truly a wise and benevolent lord, Butler Eamon said in a gratified tone. However, the old butler thought for a moment and still asked, However, master, do you want to renovate the castle you are currently living in? After all, the things here were left behind by the Su Duo family. No need, I don't care about these things. Colin waved his hand. Eamon then suggested, Do you want to change the color of the castle's outer walls? This way it won't cost much, but it will also give off a new atmosphere. Colin thought for a moment, and felt that this idea was not bad. Changing the skin of the castle would not cost much, but it would let the citizens know that there was a new master here. All right, then let's change it to red. Is this dye easy to get? Colin felt that as a member of the blood breed, red was his lucky color. Red. The old butler thought for a moment and nodded. It's convenient. The coastal areas of the empire's southern border produce a dye made from coral. It can be used to dye the castle's outer walls red. The price is not expensive either. Very good, then let's do that. Yes, master. The old butler nodded and then asked, Do we need to change the castle's name? Name. Colin rubbed his chin. He suddenly realized that he had never paid attention to the name of the Su Duo family's castle. However, this was no longer important. Let's call it Red Castle. The genius at naming Colin immediately made a decision. The corner of Eamon's mouth twitched. He was speechless at this name. The old butler was already resentful that the Angeli family's original Grey Castle was called Grey Castle. He did not expect that there would be another Red Castle now. Thinking about the names of other castles, Frostmoon Castle, White Dew Castle, Fontaine Castle, only this could reflect the self-restraint that an elegant noble should have. Don't you need to think about it again? Eamon carefully suggested. Is the name Red Castle not nice? Colin blinked and looked at the Morben brothers. The knight Raymond immediately nodded. This knight had always been obedient to Colin. The knight of Rigo also nodded frantically. I think this name is very good. Eamon glanced at him and found that this silly fellow's expression did not seem to be fake. It seemed that he really liked this name. For the family's style, I must first make the Viscount stay as far away from these two ignorant and incompetent fellows as possible. The old butler secretly thought to himself. Okay, then it's settled. Colin immediately decided on the castle's name. He really could not think of a better name. Eamon secretly sighed. He suddenly realized that there was still a long way to go to improve the Angeli family's style. Oh, that's right. Why don't we change the family crest too? Colin suddenly suggested. Colin did not like the roaring white bear emblem of the Angeli family very much. In his heart, he had some ideas about the new emblem. Butler Eamon reminded him, Master, changing the family emblem requires the approval of the Empire Senate. Okay, then let's go through the process. Colin casually replied. But to go through the process of the Senate, cough cough, Master, Colin was stunned. Only then did he realize what Eamon meant. They actually wanted to bribe him. Going through the memories of his predecessor, Colin indeed found that the Empire Senate was really like that. Without money, there was basically nothing that could be done. Especially for a small family like the Angeli family. If they did not bleed once, the elders of the Senate would not even look at them. Then forget it, let's talk about it later. Colin would not give money now. He had a lot of money now. An army. The most important thing now was to raise money to build an army. Chapter 75. Rigo. How many people are left in the family's army? Including the soldiers Raymond brought to Icestone City. There are about 600 people in the family's army. 600. Colin rubbed his head, feeling a bit depressed. Actually, this was all his dead father's fault, who had buried most of the family's army on the front lines. Now, the Angeli family only had this little bit left. We need to expand the army. Colin clenched his teeth. He was very clear that in this dangerous alternate world, only the army was his foundation. If he could have an army as terrifying as the Black Cavalry, then whoever the master of the northern frontier would have to ask for Colin's opinion. Therefore, Colin left the daily affairs of the Lord to Eamon, while he focused most of his energy on the construction of the army. Yes, Lord Viscounts. How many soldiers do you need? Colin took a sip from his mug. The coffee inside was already cold, and the bitter taste cleared his mind. First, replenish the regular army with 1,000 men, then form a reserve force of 1,000 men. I'll give you a month's time. Is that enough? Yes. The two brothers thumped their chests loudly. Colin nodded, believing that the two brothers should be able to complete this task well. However, the soldiers Colin and Raymond recruited and trained were all infantry, while the cavalry that Colin truly desired would have to be found elsewhere. Raymond, go see if Knight Charles is awake. If he is, tell him to come see me immediately. Yes. Raymond left, and Colin sat behind the desk again. He waved at Eamon and began to hand over the mountainous pile of official documents. There were a lot of things to do in the territory. Fortunately, Eamon came. Otherwise Colin would have to deal with them for a while. The Knight of Rigo sat on the side in a daze. However, he was originally someone who couldn't sit still. After drinking all the ale, he began to scratch his head and look around. Colin didn't have time to pay attention to him at this time. Not long after, Leg took the initiative to speak. Lord Viscounts, I have a small request. Speak. Colin did not even raise his head. Leg touched his bald head with an embarrassed expression on his face. I heard that your new fief includes a place called Ice Lake Town, right? Yes. The previous lord there was Baron Billy. But this idiot participated in the Lord's rebellion and was executed by the Duke. The Duke has also bestowed the territory to me. Yes, it's there. Leg rubbed his hands and said hesitantly, Do you know that it used to be the fief of the Mauben family? Hearing this, Colin put down the document in his hand and raised his head to look at Leg, his eyes carrying a trace of scrutiny. Why do I remember that the fief of the Mauben family was Cotton Town? Yes, you didn't remember wrongly. Cotton Flower Town was indeed our family's fief. However, before becoming the Lord of Cotton Flower Town, our family's fief was actually in Ice Lake Town. That was a long time ago. Even Baron Angeli doesn't know about it. The real place where the Mopben family rose was actually Ice Lake Town. The scrutinizing look in Colin's eyes disappeared, and he said with a smile, I see. It seems that your family has really experienced many ups and downs. Just now, Colin almost thought that Leg was lying. If Leg did not explain it clearly later, Colin was afraid that he would really reevaluate the loyalty of this seemingly honest knight. Yes. Leg could not help but touch his big bald head again. Colin could not help but wonder if this guy's hair was being rubbed by him like this. Colin now understood Leg's meaning. This guy probably wanted him to keep Ice Lake Town for the Mopben family and reward them after they made a contribution. However, Colin suddenly wanted to tease this silly big guy. Do you want to go back and have a look? Leg was stunned, then quickly nodded. Yes. I do want to go back and have a look. After all, it's been so many years, I don't know how it's developing now. Of course you can go. I'll give you a few days off. But when you go, you have to greet the Lord there, and pay attention to etiquette. Lord. Leg was dumbfounded. Have you already conferred Ice Lake Town to someone else? Colin held his chin and looked at Leg's dumbfounded look, feeling quite amused. Yes, I've already decided on a good candidate, but it hasn't been officially conferred yet. Leg was so anxious that his face turned red. Then who did you confer Ice Lake Town to? Colin leaned against the back of the chair with a smile, and felt that he had played enough with this silly big guy, so he told the truth. Raymond Mopben. Raymond. Leg realized that Colin was teasing him, and he immediately felt relieved. He stepped forward, knelt on one knee, and said solemnly, Thank you for your kindness to the Mopben family. My brother and I will always remember it in our hearts. What? You don't blame me for giving the title to your brother, and not you? Of course not. I already know of the contributions my brother has made along the way with you. He deserves to be rewarded. That's good. When you two help me train the first batch of troops, I will confer Raymond the title of Baron of Ice Lake Town, and let you go back with him to take a look. Thank you, sir. In fact, Colin had already planned to confer Raymond the title of Baron. After all, Raymond had been on the run with him, and had indeed worked hard and contributed a lot. Moreover, he was loyal and devoted. If he were to confer the title of Baron now, it would definitely be Raymond. However, Raymond's fief was something Colin had decided on the spot after hearing Leg's story, and learning that Ice Lake Town was the old fief of the Mopben family. Knock. Come in. The door opened again, and Raymond led Charles in. Sir Viscounts. Knight Charles bowed respectfully to Colin, as if there was no difference from before. However, Colin still felt that there seemed to be some kind of indistinct connection between the two, as if it was a kind of bloodline resonance. Moreover, although Knight Charles's rank was higher than Colin's, Colin felt that he could completely suppress the other party. This was not a suppression of strength, but a suppression of bloodline. Colin felt that Knight Charles, a clan member created through the embrace ceremony, could not be called a blood thrall. It would be more appropriate to call him a blood descendant. Leg Raymond, you two are dismissed. The recruitment and training of the troops will begin immediately. Yes, Sir Viscounts. The two brothers bowed and left. Aemon, you should leave as well. You take care of the daily affairs of the territory, and discuss with me if there's anything you can't decide on. Yes, sir. After Aemon left, the study suddenly quieted down. Colin looked at Knight Charles, hesitating on how to greet his first blood descendant. However, Knight Charles had already knelt on one knee, his left hand clasped in front of his chest, and said with a sincere expression, Sir God's chosen one, thank you for the grace you have bestowed upon me. Chapter 76. Colin was confused. What did you just call me? God's chosen one. Colin blinked and seemed to understand something. Then, he quickly sat up straight and pretended to be shocked. You actually saw through my identity. After taking a deep breath, Colin asked in a serious tone, You're right. Knight Charles, how did you recognize me as a God's chosen one? Charles raised his right hand and showed the section of his thumb to Colin. Sir, I can already feel the Lord's divine power repairing my body. To be able to cast such a divine spell and not be a priest, you must be a God's chosen one. Moreover, although I was unconscious during the healing ceremony, I still felt a trace of divine aura. That must be the aura of the God of Light. Even now, I can feel an irresistible power from you. You must be an apostle of an angel. You must be a God's chosen one. There were indeed God's chosen ones in this world. At least, that was what the Church of Light promoted. The most famous God's chosen one was, of course, the founding emperor of the Empire of Light, Garner San Lorenzo. The Church of Light recognized this legendary paladin as the angel of strength under the God of Light, Michael's apostle. And now, Colin suddenly realized that this God's chosen one setting was very suitable to fool his own blood descendants. Blood descendants created through a complete embrace ceremony obviously had their own consciousness. Although bloodline suppression could force the blood descendants to obey him, this method of control had hidden dangers. After all, loyalty under the threat of violence could not stand the test. Therefore, Colin had to use a clever method to control the other party. Then, what could be more suitable than religion to brainwash people? Knight Charles, you guessed right. I am indeed a God's chosen one. Sir, which archangel's apostle are you? After receiving Colin's confirmation, Knight Charles trembled with excitement. Colin leaned forward slightly and said seriously, Blood Angel Dracula. Blood Angel? Knight Charles was puzzled. Please forgive my ignorance, but I don't think I've heard of this archangel's name. You must have heard it before. Of course you haven't. Colin did not panic at all. With a mysterious look he said, This blood angel is a secret servant of the God of Light hidden in the darkness. He's responsible for carrying out secret missions. Of course, we can't let his name spread to the world. I understand. Now that you know who I am, to ensure the success of this secret mission, you must promise that you will never tell anyone about my real identity and what happened today. Not even His Holiness the Pope. Yes, my lord. I will never divulge any information about you. Colin looked at the fanatical Knight Charles and nodded with satisfaction. The deception was a success. In order to heal your severed finger, I instilled the blood angel's divine power into your body. Therefore, in the following period of time, your body may undergo some changes. But don't panic and don't make it public. Just record these changes and tell me. Understood? Yes, my lord, I understand. Knight Charles nodded without the slightest doubt. Then, Colin picked up a cup of water and handed it to Knight Charles. The grace of God requires a price. You've heard of this before, haven't you? Of course. Yes, the price for the grace of the blood angel this time is your loyalty and a cup of fresh blood. All right. Knight Charles cut his wrist without hesitation and let the blood flow into the cup. You're level 3 now, right? Colin asked again. Yes, my lord. There was no drop in level. Colin was a little depressed. He was still level 1. It seemed that the price of the embrace was not temporary. However, he was not too worried. Now that he had Knight Charles's blood, he should be able to recover quickly and even advance to level 3. For Colin to become a level 3 knight at such a young age, he could definitely be considered to have amazing talent. What? You said he cheated with the blood breed's characteristics? But the blood breed's characteristics were Colin's talent. After Knight Charles filled the cup, Colin asked him to stop. My lord, I think I can control my blood flow. Knight Charles looked at Colin in surprise. Colin waved his hand casually and said calmly, I said that your body will undergo some changes. These are all the grace of the blood angel. Praise the blood angel. Knight Charles did not doubt him and prayed with a sincere expression. All right, back to business. Colin put the cup of blood aside. I need you to help me train a cavalry. Of course, you have to control your alcohol consumption first. It's okay to drink a little occasionally, but don't let me see you drunk again. Yes, my lord. I'll stop drinking immediately. Knight Charles agreed without hesitation. At this moment, he swept away his previous decadent attitude and was full of energy. Although he did not know what Colin's mysterious mission was, this did not stop Knight Charles from being determined to help this blood angel apostle. He would not hesitate even if his body was crushed. How many people are you planning to recruit for the first batch of cavalry, Sir Viscounts? How many people do you think are suitable? Colin was not sure either. I don't think there should be too many in the first batch. Around 100 people would be the most suitable. All right, 100 then. I'll give you priority in recruiting soldiers. If you're interested in the active soldiers of the family army, you can also apply to transfer them to me. Yes. What else do you need? Colin did not hold back his support for the cavalry. Charles thought for a moment and said in a low voice, "My lord, to build a cavalry, there are 3 important requirements: soldiers, war horses, and armor." Chapter 77. The study was very quiet. Only the sound of writing could be heard. It was Colin writing a letter to Marquis Dawson. After being reminded by Knight Charles, Colin immediately realized that if he needed war horses and armor, rather than Marquis Garcia, he might as well look for Marquis Dawson. This dwarf Marquis was actually the head butler of the Black Cavalry, or at least he used to be. Colin did not know if Marquis Dawson was willing to help him, but he had to try. After writing a sincere letter, Colin dripped wax on the seal of the letter, stamped it with the Angeli family badge, and handed it to Charles. "Send your men to deliver this letter to Ironforge." "Yes, sir." After Knight Charles left, Colin couldn't wait to pick up the cup and drink the blood in one gulp. Then he waited patiently. However, after waiting for half a day, he still did not feel the familiar warmth. What was going on? Could it be that the blood of a blood descendant was the same as a blood slave, and could not help him advance? Colin was a little depressed. But then, he remembered that he still had 2 high-ranking knights who weren't from the blood clan under his command. Moreover, he was a third-step knight. As long as he could get his blood. Colin paced back and forth in the study, thinking of how to borrow some blood from this big idiot. Soon he had an idea. Opening the door, Colin called the guard at the door and ordered, "Go inform the Knight of Rigo to accompany me to hunt in the suburbs tomorrow morning." "Yes, sir." After giving the order, Colin returned to the study. For a moment, he did not know what to do. After all, the task had been assigned, and he only needed to take care of the overall situation. Being a leader was great. Colin leaned on the back of the chair, crossed his legs, and looked around the study. Finally, his gaze fell on the judgment blade, hanging on the wall. Since he had nothing to do, Colin stepped forward and took the sword that the Duke had bestowed upon him. He examined it carefully. This was a typical knight's sword. The sword was about 80 centimeters long, and it was completely black. The sword was covered with flame-like patterns, which were engraved with an arcane spell that had a burning effect. The blade was sharp and triangular. Under the sunlight, it emitted a chilling white light. The handle could only be held with one hand, and there was a large ball. It was believed that it could be used in a horse battle. Looking at this knight's sword, Colin suddenly remembered what Marquis Garcia said to him after the Marquis ceremony. At that time, Colin had just been conferred the title of Viscounts by the Duke St. Hilda, and he was given the judgment blade. At that time, Colin swore an unconditional loyalty oath to the Duke in a fit of anger. This obviously irritated Marquis Garcia, who had just been betrayed by his brother. Now that he thought about it, Colin suddenly felt that the reason the Duke St. Hilda treated him so well was probably to sow discord between him and Marquis Garcia. Of course, there was no point in regretting it now. Colin was now thinking about the last words Marquis Garcia said to him. Go back and understand the origin of the judgment blade in your hands. Reconsider what true loyalty is. The origin of the judgment blade? Colin's interest was suddenly piqued. Sheathing the sword, Colin immediately left the study. He remembered that there was a special library in this castle. After the trolls attacked this place, they looted all the wealth of the Suduo family. But they did not touch the books in the library. Obviously, books were not attractive to the trolls. Sir Viscounts. After arriving at the library, an old man with white hair and a white beard immediately stood up and bowed. You are the caretaker here? Yes, you can call me Quincy. Is there anything I can help you with? Colin waved the knight's sword in his hand and asked. Do you have any books about the origin of famous swords? The Judgment Blade? Oh, you actually recognize this sword? Colin was a little surprised. Quincy nodded and explained, Yes, I was fortunate enough to see this sword in Winter City. At that time, it was still the sword of the Duke St. Hilda. Colin narrowed his eyes. To recognize the sword of the Duke St. Hilda, one would definitely not be able to squeeze into a crowd and watch from afar. One would have to be very close to it. Colin did not believe that a mere caretaker of the library in the Viscount's castle would be able to get so close to the Duke St. Hilda. Have you always been a caretaker here? No, I used to be the tax officer of Icestone City. Only then did Colin feel relieved. In this world, the most important task for nobles to govern their territories was to collect taxes. To be able to become the tax officer of Icestone City, Quincy could already be considered a core retainer of the Su Duo family. Of course, this was before he was transferred here to be the caretaker of the library. Then why were you transferred here? Because I offended the Viscounts of Su Duo. How did you offend him? Quincy hesitated for a moment, but still spoke the truth. I once suggested to the Viscounts of Su Duo to reduce the business tax of Icestone City. The Viscounts of Su Duo was furious, so he stripped me of my position and transferred me here. Reduce the business tax? Colin was suddenly interested. The nobles wanted nothing more than to increase the tax every day. But this former tax officer of Icestone City actually wanted to reduce the tax. No wonder he was fired by the Viscounts of Su Duo. However, Colin felt that he might have found a treasure. Then tell me, why do you want to reduce the business tax? A glimmer of hope flashed through Quincy's eyes, and he said somewhat anxiously, Sir Viscounts, if you have seen the tax documents of Icestone City in the past, you will understand that in this city, the agricultural tax is not the biggest source of income, but the business tax. Icestone City is located at the northeast corner of the northern frontier, so a large number of caravans traveling between the northern frontier and Sky Ice Plains will pass through here. This is the main reason why Icestone City is so prosperous. However, Icestone City is not without competitors. There are still 2 or 3 cities on the northern frontier that have the qualifications to compete with us. Therefore, if you want more merchants to pass through here, then you must give them more benefits. In other words, reduce the business tax. Colin smiled and asked in return, But this way, won't my tax revenue also be reduced? No. Although the tax rate is reduced, the base of the tax revenue will increase. The total amount of tax revenue won't necessarily decrease. I have calculated before. As long as you do it properly, you don't have to worry about your tax revenue decreasing at all. Moreover, more caravans will also mean that the hotels in Icestone City will be full. The taverns will be bustling day and night, and food, clothing, medicine, and so on will be in short supply. The local merchants will make a lot of money from these passing caravans, and the entire city will become more prosperous because of this. Please believe me, there is not much potential left for the agricultural tax to be excavated. However, the business tax is very promising. If I were to do it, I am confident that I can double Icestone City's business tax revenue within 3 years. Within 10 years, this city will become the most dazzling jewel of the northern frontier. Colin looked at the flushed Quincy and didn't say anything else. Quincy also gradually calmed down from his excitement. Colin's silence made him think that he had failed again. However, he was already used to it. Asking the nobles to reduce their taxes was even more unbearable than killing them. My apologies, Sir Viscounts. Let me take you to find the books. Just as Quincy was about to give up, Colin's voice suddenly rang out. All right, I will give you this chance. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.